"This passenger needs to be removed. He does not belong in this section." The words cut through the cabin air like a blade, sharp and deliberate. They came from Heather Wilson, senior flight attendant on United Airways Flight 837, her voice carrying a certainty that left no room for question or dignity. What she did not know was that in exactly 18 minutes her entire career would be shattered by a simple flash of a badge, and the man she was trying to humiliate would forever change airline policy across the nation. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story of prejudice, power, and justice served at 30,000 feet, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe in standing up against discrimination, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Stories like this deserve to be heard. Now let's meet the man whose quiet dignity was about to collide with raw discrimination, setting off a chain reaction that no one on that flight could have predicted. Dominic Reynolds sat motionless by the airport gate, the weight of his sister's text message still heavy on his mind. "Dad's in hospital." It's serious this time. 6 simple words that had sent him rushing to O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, booking the first available flight to Atlanta. At 38, Dominic was not a man who panicked easily. His career had trained him to remain calm in situations that would break most people. But this was different. This was family, and family existed in a separate compartment of his life, one he guarded fiercely and prioritized absolutely. He wore a simple gray hoodie over a plain black t-shirt, comfortable jeans that had seen better days, and worn-in sneakers. His appearance was deliberately unremarkable, the kind of everyday anonymity that let him blend into any crowd. The only item of significance was his black backpack, which never left his sight. It contained little more than a change of clothes, his laptop phone charger, and something else, something that remained hidden and unspoken. Dominic checked his watch. 30 minutes until boarding. He took a deep breath and called his sister. "Kiana, I'm at the airport. Flight leaves in an hour." Her voice was strained but steady. "They're running tests." His heart, Dom. "They're saying it might be worse than last time. I'll be there by 4. Tell Dad I'm coming." He paused. "Has he been asking for me?" "You know how he is. Won't say it, but I can tell. He needs you here." Dominic closed his eyes briefly. "I'm coming. Just keep him fighting till I get there." As he ended the call, his work phone vibrated. The screen displayed Director Palmer. Dominic hesitated before answering. "Reynolds," he said quietly. "I understand you're taking personal leave," Director Anthony Palmer said without preamble. "Your father?" "Yes, sir. Heart complications. I'm flying to Atlanta now." "I'm sorry to hear that." The concern in Palmer's voice was genuine. "But I need to remind you of your security protocols. Operation Vanguard is at a critical stage. Your testimony next week will happen as scheduled, sir. I understand the stakes." "Good. Travel safely. Maintain your cover. No one can know who you are, especially with the Johnston faction still active in the Atlanta area." "Understood, sir." The call ended and Dominic stared at the phone. The weight of dual responsibilities settled on his shoulders. To the world around him, he was just another traveler in casual clothes. No one would guess he was Special Agent Dominic Reynolds, FBI Counterterrorism Division, the lead investigator and key witness in Operation Vanguard, a case targeting one of the most dangerous domestic terrorism networks in recent history. His testimony was scheduled in 7 days, and the Bureau had enemies everywhere. His identity was a closely guarded secret, his safety paramount to national security. And now, caught between professional duty and personal crisis, Dominic found himself boarding a commercial flight, exposed, vulnerable, and unable to reveal his true identity. The boarding announcement came over the loudspeaker. Dominic shouldered his backpack and joined the line, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. In his mind, only one thought remained. Get to Atlanta. Get to Dad. Everything else was secondary. As he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, he allowed himself one honest assessment of the situation. This would be a simple, uneventful flight. He would be in Atlanta in 2 hours. There would be no complications. He had no idea how wrong he was. United Airways Flight 837 was a standard Boeing 737 filled to capacity with the usual mix of business travelers, families, and solo passengers. Dominic made his way down the narrow aisle, counting rows until he reached 26B, a middle seat in the economy section. The window seat was already occupied by a young woman with copper-framed glasses and dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She glanced up briefly from her laptop, offered a quick, polite smile, and returned to her screen. The name Jessica Martinez was visible on the open coding project on her screen. Dominic stowed his backpack carefully under the seat in front of him, positioning it so it remained within easy reach. A habit born from years of security protocols. He settled into the cramped middle seat knees, almost touching the seat in front, and prepared himself for the uncomfortable journey ahead. Just as the final boarding announcements were being made, a large man in an expensive-looking suit rushed down the aisle, phone pressed to his ear. "No, listen, I need those projections by the time I land. This is a $50 million deal we're talking about, not some corner store purchase." His voice carried through the cabin, demanding attention. He stopped at row 26, glanced at his boarding pass, then at Dominic with undisguised disappointment. 26C, he muttered, ending his call. "Excuse me," he said without making eye contact. Dominic stood to let him in, and the man squeezed past his expensive cologne, leaving a cloud in his wake. He settled into the aisle seat with a dramatic sigh, as though the indignity of economy class was a personal affront. "William Preston," the man said, suddenly extending his hand to Dominic without looking at him. "Preston Financial Solutions, Dominic," he replied simply, giving the man's hand a brief shake. Just Dominic William raised an eyebrow. "No last name? Let me guess. Visiting family." The question felt loaded, presumptuous. "Something like that," Dominic replied, keeping his tone neutral. William nodded as if confirming something to himself, then turned back to his phone, tapping away with important-looking purpose. The pre-flight announcements began, and a flight attendant with a blonde bob cut and a name tag reading Heather Wilson moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts and overhead compartments with military precision. Her smile never quite reached her eyes as she scanned each row. When she reached row 26, her gaze swept over the passengers. She nodded approvingly at William, glanced past Dominic without acknowledgement, and gave Jessica a practiced smile. "Sir," she said suddenly, looking directly at Dominic, "your bag needs to be completely under the seat." Dominic glanced down. His backpack was already pushed as far as it could go, flush against the metal bar. "It is," he replied calmly. Heather's smile tightened. "It needs to be all the way under, sir. It's a federal regulation." She spoke with exaggerated slowness, as if explaining a complex concept to someone who might not understand. Dominic noticed Jessica glance up from her laptop, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I understand," Dominic said, reaching down to demonstrate by pushing the bag. It didn't move further. "This is as far as it will go." Heather stared at him for a beat too long. "Make sure it stays that way," she finally said, before moving on. Just then the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, folks. This is Captain Richard Thompson welcoming you aboard United Airways Flight 837 to Atlanta. Flight time today is approximately 2 hours and 10 minutes. We're expecting some light turbulence about halfway through our journey, but nothing to worry about. We'll be taking off shortly, so please give your attention to the flight attendants for the safety demonstration." As the safety video began playing, Dominic noticed William was still on his phone, now loudly discussing market projections. Heather passed by again, but this time she didn't stop to reprimand him. Instead, she paused at row 26 and looked directly at Dominic. "Sir, all electronic devices need to be in airplane mode for takeoff. Dominic held up his phone, which was already switched to airplane mode. He had turned it on the moment he'd boarded. Heather looked momentarily flustered, but recovered quickly. She glanced at William, who was still talking loudly on his phone, but instead of addressing him, she simply moved on. Jessica's eyes met Dominic's briefly. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. Both had noticed the inconsistency in treatment. She turned back to her laptop, but not before Dominic caught a subtle shake of her head. As the plane began to taxi, William finally ended his call, but immediately began a new one. Robert. Yeah, it's Preston. Listen, I need you to pull those Atlanta property files. We're going to crush this meeting. These local developers have no idea what's coming. Heather passed by again during the final check. She pointedly cleared her throat near William, who gave her a charming smile and held up one finger in a just-a-minute gesture. She nodded and continued down the aisle. The contrast was stark and unmistakable. Dominic leaned his head back and closed his eyes, letting the familiar weight of different standards settle over him. It wasn't new. It wasn't surprising. It was just another day. As the engines roared to life and the plane accelerated down the runway, Dominic thought of his father. Robert Reynolds had taught him many things, but one lesson had always stood out. In this world, son, you'll be judged by standards others will never have to meet. Your dignity isn't in how they treat you. It's in how you respond. The plane lifted off the ground, carrying Dominic toward his ailing father, unaware that the real journey was just beginning. 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign dinged off and the cabin crew began preparation for beverage service. Dominic sat quietly, a book open in his hands, a biography of jazz legend John Coltrane, though his mind kept drifting to his father. Robert Reynolds had introduced him to Coltrane's music when he was just 8 years old, explaining the discipline and soul behind each note. William Preston had not stopped talking since takeoff. After exhausting his supply of business calls, he had turned his attention to his seatmates. So he said, turning to Dominic, "What takes you to Atlanta, business or pleasure, family?" Dominic replied without elaboration. William nodded as if this confirmed something. "I thought so." "Me. I'm closing a major development deal, $50 million, revitalizing a neighborhood that frankly needs it." Jessica looked up from her laptop. "Which neighborhood, East Side? Near the old factory district. It's pretty run down now, but we're going to bring in high-end retail luxury apartments. Real progress, you know." "Sounds like gentrification," Jessica said quietly, returning to her screen. William's expression hardened slightly. "I prefer to call it urban renewal. Those neighborhoods need investment. Those neighborhoods need affordable housing and jobs that match the skills of current residents." Jessica countered, not looking up. "Not displacement." The beverage cart approached, pushed by Heather and another flight attendant. They started at the front of the economy section, working their way back row by row. Dominic watched as Heather served each passenger with professional efficiency, though her smile seemed reserved for certain passengers. As she approached row 26, she served William first. "What can I get you, sir?" Her tone was warm, friendly. "Scotch if you have it. No ice." William flashed what he clearly thought was a charming smile. "Of course," Heather replied, pouring his drink. She then turned to Jessica. "And for you, miss, just water." "Thank you," Jessica said. Heather nodded and poured the water, then started to move the cart forward without acknowledging Dominic. "Excuse me," Dominic said calmly. "Could I have a water, please?" Heather paused, her expression flickering momentarily before settling into a tight smile. "Oh, I'm sorry. What would you like, water, please?" She handed him a cup of water without meeting his eyes, then quickly moved the cart forward. William took a sip of his scotch. So he said to Dominic, "What do you do?" The question was loaded with assumption. Dominic considered his response carefully, balancing his cover with his growing irritation. "I work in security," he said finally. It wasn't a lie, just an oversimplification. William snorted. Security guard, huh? Good steady work, I guess. Dominic didn't correct him. Let him assume. It was safer that way. You know, William continued, lowering his voice, I've had to hire extra security for our Atlanta project. That neighborhood... He glanced around and leaned closer. Well, let's just say it's got some elements that make investors nervous. The implication was clear. Dominic's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A memory surfaced. His father at 45, dignified in a pressed suit, being followed around a department store by a security guard who never approached the white shoppers. Dominic had been 12, old enough to understand, but young enough to still be shocked. What elements would those be exactly? Dominic asked, his voice level. William shifted uncomfortably. You know, high crime rates, gang activity, that sort of thing. Have you spent much time in that neighborhood, Mr. Preston? Well, no. My team handles the ground research. I see. Dominic returned to his book, signaling the end of the conversation. William, however, wasn't finished. Look, I'm just being realistic. Statistics don't lie. Some neighborhoods are just more dangerous than others. It's not about he cut himself off, not about what Dominic looked up from his book. Nothing. Just business realities. William turned away, suddenly very interested in the in-flight magazine. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, jostling the passengers. Dominic's water splashed slightly, a few drops landing on William's sleeve. Hey, watch it. William snapped, his reaction disproportionate to the minor incident. Sorry about that, Dominic said evenly. Just turbulence. William made a show of dabbing at his sleeve with a napkin. This is a $3,000 suit. Jessica glanced over, eyebrows raised at the overreaction. The turbulence increased and the captain's voice came over the intercom. Folks, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. I'm turning on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please return to your seats and make sure your seatbelts are securely fastened. Another strong jolt rocked the plane, and William's remaining scotch spilled onto his lap. Damn it. He looked up, searching for a flight attendant. I need some napkins here. Heather appeared almost instantly. I'm so sorry about that, sir. Let me get you some more napkins. She hurried away and returned with a handful of napkins, helping William dab at his pants. Would you like another drink, sir? On the house, of course. Yes, that would be appropriate, William said imperiously. As Heather turned to get his drink, her elbow knocked into Dominic's shoulder. She didn't apologize or acknowledge it. The tension in row 26 was building molecule by molecule, interaction by interaction. Dominic took a deep breath. 2 more hours. Just 2 more hours and he would be in Atlanta with his father. He could endure this. He had endured worse. What he didn't know was that the real test was yet to come. Another bout of turbulence hit the aircraft, this one stronger than before. The plane dipped suddenly, causing several passengers to gasp. Dominic's shoulder was pressed against William's as the motion pushed them together. Do you mind, William hissed, shifting away as if Dominic had deliberately invaded his space. Just turbulence, Dominic repeated calmly, though his patience was wearing thin. Well, keep to your own space. I paid for this seat, not half of yours, too. Jessica looked up from her laptop, her expression a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. Seriously, it's turbulence. No one's doing it on purpose. William glared at her. I wasn't talking to you. The plane stabilized and Heather returned with William's replacement scotch. Here you are, sir. So sorry about the turbulence. As she handed him the drink, William gestured subtly toward Dominic. Actually, could I speak with you privately for a moment? Heather nodded. Of course. She leaned down and William whispered something to her. Her eyes darted to Dominic, narrowing slightly. I understand, sir. I'll take care of it, she said in a low voice, though not low enough that Dominic couldn't hear. She straightened up and addressed Dominic directly. Sir, is there a problem here? No problem, Dominic replied evenly. Just experiencing the same turbulence as everyone else. Mr. Preston feels you're being disruptive. Dominic raised an eyebrow. Disruptive. I've been sitting here reading my book and responding when spoken to. He says you've been hostile and making him uncomfortable. Jessica interjected. That's not true. If anything, he's been bothering us with his constant talking. Heather ignored her. Sir, I need you to understand that we take passenger comfort very seriously on United Airways. The implication was clear. Some passengers' comfort mattered more than others. Dominic felt a familiar heat rising in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. I understand completely, he said. I also take my right to be treated with respect very seriously. Heather's expression hardened. Is that a threat? Not at all, just a statement of fact. The confrontation was drawing attention now. Passengers in nearby rows were turning to watch the exchange. Heather seemed to notice the audience and modulated her tone. Just keep to yourself for the remainder of the flight and there won't be any issues. She turned to William. Is there anything else I can do for you, sir? This is fine for now, William replied, shooting a smug look at Dominic. As Heather walked away, a new figure appeared in the aisle. First Officer Michael Rodriguez, his uniform crisp and his expression concerned. Is everything all right back here? He asked. The captain asked me to check after hearing about a potential situation. Everything's fine now, Officer, Heather replied before anyone else could speak. Just a small misunderstanding that's been resolved. Rodriguez looked unconvinced. His eyes moved from Heather to William, then to Dominic and Jessica. Sir, he addressed Dominic directly. Is everything okay? The direct acknowledgement was unexpected. Dominic nodded. Yes, just a disagreement about personal space during turbulence. Rodriguez studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. If there are any further issues, please don't hesitate to let one of our crew members know. This last part seemed directed at all of them, not just Dominic. As Rodriguez returned to the cockpit, William muttered under his breath, Unbelievable. Dominic turned to him. What's unbelievable, Mr. Preston? William shifted uncomfortably. Nothing. Just drop it. But Dominic had reached his limit with subtle jabs and veiled implications. No, please. I'd like to hear what you find unbelievable. The fact that the officer addressed me directly, or the fact that he treated me like a human being deserving of respect? William's face flushed. Listen, I don't know what kind of chip you have on your shoulder. I don't have a chip on my shoulder. I have an expectation of basic courtesy the same as anyone else on this plane. Jessica had closed her laptop, now fully engaged in the escalating situation. William looked around as if seeking support from other passengers. Finding none, he turned back to Dominic. Look, I'm just trying to have a peaceful flight here. So am I, Dominic replied. I was sitting here reading when you decided I was taking up too much space during turbulence. Then you whispered to the flight attendant who came over and accused me of being disruptive. Now you're suggesting I have a chip on my shoulder because I expect to be treated with basic dignity. The clarity of Dominic's summary hung in the air between them. Several nearby passengers were now openly listening, some with expressions of discomfort, others nodding slightly in agreement. William seemed to realize he was losing the public narrative. You're twisting things, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm stating facts, Dominic countered. If those facts make you uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine why. William turned away, signaling his desire to end the conversation. But the damage was done. A line had been drawn, and the tension in row 26 had transformed from subtle to explicit. Dominic returned to his book, though he was no longer reading. His mind was calculating probabilities, assessing threats, planning contingencies, professional habits that never quite turned off. Something had shifted in the cabin's atmosphere, and his instincts told him this confrontation was far from over. In the quiet that followed, Jessica leaned slightly toward Dominic and whispered, For what it's worth, I saw everything. You didn't do anything wrong." Dominic nodded in acknowledgement, but said nothing. Witnesses were good, but they didn't always matter when systems were stacked against you. His father had taught him that lesson, too. As if summoned by the thought, his mind returned to his father lying in a hospital bed in Atlanta. That was what mattered. Not this petty power play, not William's prejudice, not Heather's bias, just getting to Atlanta, getting to his father's side. Little did he know how much more would stand in his way before that could happen. The flight continued in tense silence for another 20 minutes. Dominic had returned to his book. William was pretending to review documents on his tablet, and Jessica had reopened her laptop, though she seemed more alert to the dynamics around her now. Heather passed by their row several times each time, giving William a reassuring smile while pointedly ignoring Dominic. The pattern was so obvious that even passengers in adjacent rows had begun to notice exchanging glances and whispers. During one pass, William signaled Heather over and whispered something to her again. This time Dominic caught fragments. "Keeps watching me. Suspicious bag. Security concern." Heather's expression changed to one of alarm. She nodded gravely and hurried toward the front of the plane. "What was that about?" Dominic asked William directly. "None of your business," William replied, not meeting his eyes. Dominic felt his professional instincts sharpening. Something was happening, and it wasn't good. Moments later, Heather returned with another flight attendant, a younger woman whose name tag read Lisa. They stopped at row 26, and Heather addressed Dominic. "Sir, we need to check your backpack." The request was unexpected but not surprising given William's whispered conversation. Dominic maintained his composure. "May I ask why we've received a security concern about your bag?" Heather replied, her tone official. "A concern from the passenger sitting next to me who has been trying to create an issue since we boarded." Heather's lips tightened. "Sir, we take all security concerns seriously regardless of who reports them." Dominic nodded slowly. "I understand that. But I also understand that without probable cause or reasonable suspicion you don't have the authority to search my personal belongings." This was a critical moment. Inside that backpack was his FBI badge, his service weapon secured in a lockbox, and documents related to Operation Vanguard. If they searched it, his cover would be blown, potentially compromising the entire operation and his upcoming testimony. Heather's expression hardened. "Sir, as stated in United Airways terms of service which you agreed to when purchasing your ticket, we reserve the right to inspect any luggage or personal items if we have security concerns." "I'm familiar with airline regulations," Dominic replied calmly. "Those inspections are typically conducted by TSA officials before boarding, not by flight attendants mid-flight based on a complaint from a passenger with an obvious bias." Jessica spoke up. "He hasn't done anything with his bag the entire flight. It's been under the seat. I've been sitting right next to him." "Ma'am, please stay out of this," Lisa said. More passengers were watching now. Someone a few rows back had taken out a phone and appeared to be recording. William leaned away from Dominic, putting on a show of discomfort. "I just don't feel safe," he said loudly. "He's been acting strange this whole flight, and now he won't let them check his bag. What's he hiding?" The theatrical performance was having its intended effect. Murmurs rippled through nearby passengers, and Dominic could see the shift in some of their expressions, from neutral observation to suspicion. Dominic faced a crucial decision. If he allowed them to search his bag, his mission could be compromised. If he continued to refuse, the situation would escalate further, potentially leading to even worse outcomes. "I'm not hiding anything," Dominic stated clearly. "I'm exercising my rights as a passenger. If you have a legitimate security concern, then follow proper protocol. Contact the captain, and if necessary, he can contact ground security to meet the plane upon landing." Heather seemed taken aback by his knowledge of procedure. "The captain has already been informed," she said, recovering quickly, "and he agrees with our assessment." As if on cue, the cabin intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Thompson speaking. Due to a situation on board, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Charlotte, North Carolina. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. We should be on the ground in approximately 25 minutes. A wave of concerned murmurs swept through the cabin. Passengers looked around, trying to identify the situation. More phones came out, recording discreetly. "Are you serious right now?" Jessica asked incredulously. "You're diverting the entire plane because he won't let you search his bag based on this man's complaint." She gestured to William, who was now putting on a show of being genuinely fearful. "Ma'am, this is now a matter of aircraft security," Lisa replied firmly. Dominic maintained his composure, though internally he was calculating the cascading consequences. A diversion to Charlotte meant delay. Delay in reaching his father. Delay that could be critical. It also meant potential exposure, law enforcement involvement, and possible compromise of his undercover status. "This is discrimination, plain and simple," Jessica said loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I've been watching this whole interaction. This man," she pointed at William, "has been antagonizing him since takeoff, and now he's fabricating security concerns because he didn't like being called out on his behavior." William's face reddened. "How dare you? I'm a respected businessman with legitimate concerns." Dominic remained silent, observing the situation unfold. More passengers were recording now, capturing the escalating confrontation. Heather addressed the cabin at large. "Everyone please remain calm and seated. This is a standard security procedure." "There's nothing standard about this," came a voice from across the aisle. A middle-aged woman who had been quietly observing. "I've been watching too. This is profiling." The word hung in the air, charged and unavoidable. Dominic finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "You're making a judgment based on appearance, not behavior. I hope everyone recording this understands what they're witnessing." Heather's expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time as she registered just how many passengers were now recording the interaction. But she quickly composed herself. "Security will handle this when we land," she said with finality. "Until then, please remain in your seat." As she and Lisa moved back toward the front of the plane, Dominic could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him. Some sympathetic, others suspicious, many simply confused by the unfolding drama. "Thank you," he said quietly to Jessica. She shook her head. "Don't thank me. This is wrong on so many levels." William shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with either of them. His plan had worked. The flight was being diverted, but he hadn't anticipated becoming the villain in videos that were likely already being uploaded to social media platforms. Dominic closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Sometimes, son, the most powerful thing you can do is simply bear witness to your own dignity. Let them show themselves for who they are." The plane began its descent toward Charlotte, and Dominic prepared himself for what was coming. He had options, but none of them were good. The moment he showed his FBI credentials, Operation Vanguard could be compromised. But if he didn't, he might be detained, arrested, or worse, preventing him from reaching his father at all. As the plane banked into a turn, Dominic made his decision. He would wait until the last possible moment. Let the situation develop fully. Let the record be clear. And then, and only then, would he reveal who he truly was. The aircraft began its final approach to Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Through the window, Dominic could see the sprawling terminals and runways coming into view. The cabin remained tense, with whispered conversations and the occasional flash of a phone camera capturing the moment. Captain Thompson's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into Charlotte. The local time is 2:15 p.m. and the temperature is 72 degrees. Upon landing, I ask that everyone remain seated until further instructions are given. We have security personnel meeting the aircraft." Dominic felt a quiet resignation settle over him. This was happening. The question now was how to minimize the damage. to his mission, to his ability to reach his father, and to his dignity. William had been suspiciously quiet since the announcement of the diversion. His initial smugness had given way to something more uncertain as he became aware of the number of passengers recording the situation. Now he sat rigidly staring straight ahead, occasionally glancing at his watch. Jessica had closed her laptop and stowed it, but kept her phone out, recording intermittently. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. "They're really going through with this." The plane touched down smoothly and taxied toward a remote part of the airport away from the main terminals. This was standard procedure for security situations. Isolation before assessment. Dominic knew the protocol well. He had helped design similar procedures during his early years with the Bureau. As the aircraft came to a complete stop, the seatbelt sign remained on. Captain Thompson's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached our temporary destination in Charlotte. As I mentioned, we have security personnel approaching the aircraft. I ask that everyone remain seated and calm. We will handle this situation professionally and resume our journey to Atlanta as quickly as possible." Through the window, Dominic could see several airport security vehicles approaching. This was escalating exactly as he had anticipated. Heather appeared at the front of the economy cabin, her expression severe. "The passenger in 26B will be escorted off the aircraft first. Everyone else will remain seated." A murmur ran through the cabin. Someone near the back called out, "This is wrong." Dominic felt a strange calm descend over him. The moment of decision was approaching, but not yet. He needed witnesses, documentation, a clear record of what was happening. The more they overreacted, the stronger his position would become, both legally and in the court of public opinion. Jessica turned to him, her voice low. "This is insane. You haven't done anything wrong." "I know," he replied simply. "You could sue them for this." A ghost of a smile crossed Dominic's face. "Let's see how it plays out." The main cabin door opened and 2 airport security officers boarded the plane, followed by a United Airways ground supervisor. They conferred briefly with Heather, who pointed down the aisle toward row 26. The security officers, both white men in their 30s with buzz cuts and imposing physiques, began making their way down the aisle. Their name badges read Riggs and Anderson. "Sir," the officer named Riggs addressed Dominic, "we need you to gather your belongings and come with us." Dominic looked at him steadily. "On what grounds am I being removed from this flight?" "The flight crew has reported a security concern. We need you to comply immediately." "What specific security concern? I've done nothing wrong." Officer Anderson stepped forward. "Sir, we can discuss this in the terminal. Right now I need you to stand up and come with us." Jessica interrupted. "This is discrimination. He's done nothing wrong. I've been sitting next to him the entire flight." "Ma'am, please stay out of this," Riggs said sharply. More passengers were recording now, their phones held high to capture every word of the exchange. Dominic remained seated. "I have a right to know why I'm being removed from this flight." Heather stepped forward. "Sir, you refused a security check of your bag after a passenger expressed concerns. Your behavior has been disruptive and threatening." "That's a lie," Jessica said immediately. "I've been right here. He hasn't been disruptive or threatening at all." Other passengers began to voice their agreement. "I saw the whole thing. This is profiling. He didn't do anything wrong." But there were also voices of support for the removal. "Just get him off so we can continue our flight. If he has nothing to hide, why won't he show his bag?" The cabin was dividing tensions, rising. This was exactly what Dominic had wanted to avoid, but it was also creating a clear record of the situation. Every phone camera was documenting what was happening, evidence that couldn't be denied or reinterpreted later. Officer Riggs's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Sir, I won't ask you again. Stand up and come with us now, or we will remove you physically." Dominic looked him directly in the eyes. "Your uniform doesn't give you the right to discriminate. It gives you the responsibility to be fair. I'm asking you to consider whether you're fulfilling that responsibility right now." The words landed with visible impact. Riggs blinked momentarily, thrown off his script. Anderson, however, was unmoved. "That's enough. Stand up now." Dominic knew this was the pivotal moment. He could reveal his identity, now end this charade immediately. But doing so would potentially compromise national security, the Operation Vanguard case, and his upcoming testimony. The risk was too great. He made his decision. "I will comply under protest," he said clearly, his voice carrying through the now silent cabin. "I want everyone recording this to know that I am being removed without cause, without evidence, and without due process. This is what discrimination looks like in real time." He stood slowly, careful to keep his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He reached down for his backpack, but Officer Anderson stopped him. "We'll take that," he said, grabbing the bag. "No," Dominic said firmly. "That bag contains personal items and stays with me." A brief standoff ensued with Anderson's hand on the bag and Dominic not releasing it. "Let go of the bag, sir," Riggs warned. "It stays with me," Dominic repeated. "Or you can explain to a federal judge why you seized personal property without cause or warrant." The mention of a federal judge caused both officers to hesitate. Dominic seized the moment of uncertainty. "I will walk off this plane voluntarily with my property, and we can address this situation properly in the terminal." After a moment, Anderson released the bag. "Fine, but you walk in front of us." Dominic nodded, shouldered his backpack, and turned to Jessica. "Thank you for speaking up." She nodded, her expression a mixture of anger and concern. "This isn't right. I'll send you the videos." As Dominic stepped into the aisle, he heard William mutter under his breath, "Finally getting what you deserve." Dominic paused, turned, and looked William directly in the eyes. "I'm not upset that you can't see who I am. I'm concerned that you think you already know." The statement landed like a physical blow. William recoiled slightly, his expression uncertain. With dignity intact, Dominic began walking toward the front of the plane, the security officers close behind him. As he passed through first class, he could feel the weight of every stare, hear the whispers, sense the judgments being formed and reformed. At the front of the plane, Captain Thompson stood near the cockpit door observing the scene. His eyes met Dominic's briefly, and something passed between them. A flicker of doubt, perhaps, or the first inkling that a grave mistake was being made. Heather stood by the exit, her expression vindicated. "Security will handle you from here," she said, the smugness in her tone unmistakable. Dominic didn't respond. He simply walked past her and stepped onto the jetway where his patience would face its final test. The jetway was empty and eerily quiet after the tension-filled cabin. Dominic walked steadily forward, his backpack secure on his shoulder, the security officers, Riggs and Anderson, close behind him. He maintained a deliberate pace, not rushing, not dawdling, his posture upright and dignified despite the humiliation of the situation. "Stop right there," Officer Riggs commanded when they reached the midpoint of the jetway, away from the aircraft door but still not visible to the terminal. "Turn around slowly." Dominic complied, turning to face the two men. Their stances had shifted, becoming more aggressive now that they were away from the watchful eyes and recording phones of the passengers. "Put the bag down." Anderson ordered, his hand hovering near his belt. "The bag stays with me," Dominic repeated calmly. "It contains personal items." "This isn't a negotiation," Riggs said, stepping closer. "Put the bag down now." Dominic assessed the situation with the clarity of his professional training. Both officers were positioned to block his path. Their body language indicated escalation was imminent. There were no witnesses present in the jetway, though security cameras would be recording, assuming they were functioning. "I understand you're doing your job," Dominic said, keeping his voice level. "But I need you to understand that I've done nothing wrong. I'm being removed from this flight because of prejudice, not because of any security threat." "That's not our concern," Anderson replied. Our job is to remove you from the aircraft, which we've done. Now we need to check your bag before escorting you to the security office. Dominic knew what would happen if they checked his bag. His FBI credentials would be discovered along with his service weapon. While this would immediately change the dynamic, it would also potentially compromise Operation Vanguard. He needed to delay that revelation until absolutely necessary. "I've complied with your request to leave the aircraft," he said. "I will accompany you to the security office, but my bag remains with me unless you have probable cause or a warrant." Riggs exchanged a glance with Anderson, then stepped forward, suddenly reaching for the backpack. "Enough of this." Dominic stepped back, maintaining his grip on the bag. "Don't do this," he warned. "You're making a mistake." "The mistake was yours," Anderson said, moving to flank Dominic. "Last chance to cooperate." Dominic stood his ground. "I know my rights. What you're doing is illegal." That was enough for Riggs. He lunged forward, grabbing Dominic's arm while reaching for the bag. Anderson moved in from the other side, and suddenly Dominic found himself in a physical confrontation he had hoped to avoid. He didn't resist. That would only escalate the situation further, but he also didn't surrender his backpack. The resulting struggle was awkward and increasingly aggressive as the officer's frustration mounted. "Stop resisting," Riggs shouted, though Dominic wasn't fighting back. "I'm not resisting," Dominic replied evenly. "I'm maintaining possession of my property, which is my right." Anderson grabbed Dominic's shoulder and pulled him backward roughly. On the ground. Now. The situation was spiraling. If they forced him to the ground, injury became more likely and his options would narrow dramatically. Dominic made a split-second decision. He released the backpack. "Fine," he said, letting go. "Take it, but I want both of your badge numbers and names for the lawsuit that will follow." The sudden capitulation seemed to throw the officers off balance. Riggs stumbled slightly as the resistance disappeared while Anderson quickly grabbed the backpack. "On your knees," Riggs demanded, recovering his composure. "That's unnecessary," Dominic replied. "I've complied with your demand to surrender my bag." "On your knees," Riggs repeated more forcefully. Dominic looked him directly in the eyes. "No, I will walk with you to the security office, but I will not kneel. There's no threat here that justifies that level of control." The standoff stretched for several long seconds. Then Anderson, who had been examining the backpack, called out, "Riggs, there's some kind of metal box in here. Locked." That was the secure container for his service weapon, biometrically sealed and impossible to open without his fingerprint. But they wouldn't know that. Riggs's expression darkened. "What's in the box?" he demanded. The moment of truth was approaching, but Dominic decided to hold out a little longer. "Personal items," he said. "Nothing illegal or dangerous." "Open it," Riggs ordered. "I can't. Not here." Anderson stepped forward, the backpack in one hand. "What do you mean you can't? I mean, it's not possible to open it here." The officers exchanged glances, their suspicion visibly increasing. Against the wall, Riggs ordered suddenly, "Hands where I can see them." Dominic complied, turning to face the wall of the jetway, placing his hands flat against it. This was rapidly approaching the point of no return. "This is your last chance to treat me with dignity," Dominic said, his voice steady despite his position. "What happens next will determine a lot about your future." "Shut up," Anderson snapped. "You don't make threats here. It's not a threat. It's a fact." Riggs approached from behind, and Dominic felt hands patting down his sides, checking for weapons or contraband. Finding nothing, Riggs stepped back. "Let's move," he said. "Security office. Now." They led Dominic through the jetway door into the terminal where several passengers waiting at nearby gates turned to watch the spectacle of a man being escorted by security. Some raised phones to record the scene. The public visibility seemed to moderate the officers' behavior slightly. They maintained firm grips on Dominic's arms, but were no longer shoving or manhandling him. As they walked through the terminal, Dominic noted the increasing number of witnesses and recording devices. This was good. The more documentation, the better. They reached a door marked Airport Security. Authorized personnel only, and Anderson punched in a code. The door opened to reveal a corridor leading to several offices. In here, Riggs directed, steering Dominic toward a small interrogation room. The room was sparse. A metal table bolted to the floor, 3 chairs, and a one-way mirror on one wall. Standard intimidation setup. "Sit," Anderson ordered, pointing to a chair. Dominic sat calmly, his posture relaxed despite the circumstances. He watched as Anderson placed the backpack on the table, eyeing it suspiciously. Now Riggs said, looming over him, "You're going to tell us exactly what's in that box, or things are going to get very unpleasant for you." Dominic looked up at him steadily. "Officer Riggs, I understand you believe you're doing your job, but you've made a series of escalating mistakes, and I'm giving you one last opportunity to correct course before irreparable damage is done to your career." Anderson laughed harshly. "Listen to this guy. Who do you think you are?" The moment had come. Dominic took a deep breath. "I think you should call your supervisor. Right now." "We don't take orders from you," Riggs sneered. "No." Dominic agreed. "But you do take orders from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and right now you're interfering with a federal officer in the execution of his duties." The officers froze, exchanging uncertain glances. "Bullshit," Anderson said, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Call your supervisor," Dominic repeated calmly. "This situation has gone far enough." Back on the jetway, the confrontation had reached a critical point. Dominic stood with his back against the wall, the 2 security officers, Riggs and Anderson, facing him with increasing aggression. His backpack lay on the ground between them, the subject of their suspicion and the catalyst for this escalating situation. "What's in the box?" Riggs demanded again, his patience clearly exhausted. Dominic maintained his composure, though he knew the moment of revelation was approaching. "I've told you. Personal items that are not a security threat." "Then open it," Anderson insisted. "I can't do that here." "Can't or won't," Riggs stepped closer, invading Dominic's personal space. Both Dominic replied evenly. "The contents are secure for a reason, and this jetway is not the appropriate place to reveal them." Anderson scoffed. "Listen to this guy, not the appropriate place." "Who do you think you are?" The question hung in the air, an unintentional invitation that Dominic was not yet ready to accept. Instead, he tried one more time to de-escalate. "I understand you're doing what you believe is your job, but you're making assumptions based on incomplete information, and those assumptions are leading you to act in ways that will have serious consequences. The only one facing consequences here is you," Riggs said, jabbing a finger toward Dominic's chest. "Last chance. Open the box, or we'll consider it a threat and respond accordingly." Dominic assessed his options. The situation had deteriorated beyond peaceful resolution. If he continued to refuse, physical force was imminent. If he revealed his identity now, Operation Vanguard could be compromised, but at least he would avoid further humiliation and potential injury. He made his decision. "This is your last chance to treat me with dignity." Dominic said, his voice calm but carrying a new weight of authority. "What happens next will determine a lot about your future." "Is that a threat?" Anderson stepped forward, hand moving to his belt where a taser was holstered. "No," Dominic replied. "It's a fact." Riggs had had enough. He grabbed Dominic's shoulder roughly. "Against the wall. Now!" Dominic didn't resist as Riggs spun him around, pushing him face first against the jetway wall. He felt hands patting down his sides, checking for weapons. "Spread your legs," Riggs commanded. Dominic complied, allowing the search to continue. This was crossing a line that could not be uncrossed, and he knew it. "Nothing," Riggs reported, stepping back. Anderson picked up the backpack, unzipping the main compartment. "Let's see what you're so determined to hide." He pulled out clothes, a book, a phone charger, and finally the metal lockbox, approximately the size of a large paperback book, with a biometric scanner on its face. "What's this?" Anderson held it up. "As I said, it's secured for a reason," Dominic replied, still facing the wall. "Turn around," Riggs ordered. Dominic turned slowly to face them. The moment of truth had arrived. "Open it," Anderson demanded, holding out the box. "I will open it," Dominic said evenly. "But I need you both to understand something first. The moment I do, everything changes. Not just for me, but for you." The officers exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering across their faces for the first time. "Enough games," Riggs snapped. "Open it now." Dominic nodded once. "Very well." He reached slowly into the inner pocket of his hoodie, a movement that caused both officers to tense, and withdrew not a weapon, but a slim, black wallet. "Before I open that box," he said, holding the wallet, "you should see this first." He flipped the wallet open to reveal a gold shield and identification card. The words Federal Bureau of Investigation were clearly visible, along with his photo and name, Special Agent Dominic Reynolds. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Both officers froze their expressions, transforming from aggressive confidence to stunned disbelief in an instant. "What the—" Anderson's voice trailed off. Riggs took an involuntary step backward. "Is this some kind of joke? I assure you it's not." Dominic replied, his voice now carrying the full weight of his authority. "Special Agent Dominic Reynolds, FBI Counterterrorism Division. You've just interfered with a federal officer in the execution of his duties." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of the airport terminal beyond the jetway door. "The lockbox," Dominic continued, "contains my service weapon secured according to federal air travel protocols. I am currently operating undercover as part of an ongoing federal investigation which you have now potentially compromised." Anderson's face had gone pale. He carefully set the backpack down as if it had suddenly become radioactive. "We were just following orders," he said weakly. "Following orders is not an excuse for violating civil rights," Dominic replied. "Nor is it a shield against the consequences of interfering with federal law enforcement." Riggs found his voice. "We had no way of knowing. You had every opportunity to assess this situation objectively." Dominic cut him off. "Instead, you chose to escalate at every turn, ignoring witness statements that contradicted the narrative you preferred and using physical force without justification." The door to the aircraft suddenly opened, and Captain Thompson stepped onto the jetway, likely coming to check on the situation. He stopped short at the tableau before him, Dominic holding his FBI credentials, the two security officers in obvious distress. "What's happening here?" Thompson asked, his voice uncertain. Dominic turned to face him. "Captain, I'm Special Agent Dominic Reynolds, FBI. I believe we need to have a conversation about what just occurred on your aircraft." Thompson's face drained of color. "FBI," he repeated as if hoping he had misheard. "Yes," Dominic confirmed. "And right now, I need to use your phone to contact my field office. This situation has escalated beyond what can be handled here on this jetway." The realization of what was happening, of what they had done, was dawning on all three men simultaneously. Their actions, which had seemed justified through the lens of bias and assumption, were now revealed as something entirely different, a grave error with potentially career-ending consequences. Of course, Thompson managed, pulling a phone from his pocket. "Whatever you need." As Dominic took the phone, the jetway door from the terminal opened again. This time, a woman in a business suit entered, her expression shifting from professional concern to recognition as she saw Dominic. "Agent Reynolds," she said, moving quickly toward him. "Agent Gabriela Ramirez, Charlotte Field Office. Director Palmer alerted us to the situation." Dominic nodded, unsurprised that the Bureau's information network had already tracked the diverted flight. Perfect timing, Agent Ramirez. We have a situation that needs immediate containment. He turned back to Riggs and Anderson, who stood frozen in place, the reality of their predicament sinking in with each passing second. Officers Riggs and Anderson. Dominic said, his voice level but carrying undeniable authority. You are currently in possession of my personal property seized without cause or warrant. I'll take my backpack now. Anderson quickly handed over the backpack, avoiding eye contact. Thank you, Dominic said. Now I suggest you both prepare yourselves for a very long day of explaining your actions to your superiors, to FBI investigators, and possibly to federal prosecutors. Discrimination and civil rights violations are taken very seriously, especially when they interfere with federal investigations. The transformation was complete. The men who had moments ago been intimidating and aggressive now stood deflated. Their perceived power evaporated in the face of actual authority. Dominic turned to Agent Ramirez. We need to contain this situation quickly. Operation Vanguard may be compromised. She nodded briskly. We have a team securing the terminal. What's your assessment? Multiple witnesses. Numerous recordings, Dominic replied. This will be all over social media within the hour if it isn't already. Understood, Ramirez said. Director Palmer has authorized whatever resources you need. Captain Thompson, who had been watching this exchange with increasing alarm, finally spoke up. Agent Reynolds, I want to personally apologize. Not now. Captain Dominic cut him off. Right now, we need to address the immediate security concerns. There will be plenty of time for apologies later. The captain nodded, chastened. Dominic turned back to the jetway door leading to the aircraft. Let's return to the plane. There are several matters that need to be addressed. As they moved toward the door, Dominic paused and looked back at Officers Riggs and Anderson, who remained rooted to the spot, their futures visibly crumbling before their eyes. One more thing, he said. You asked me who I thought I was. The answer is simple. I'm exactly who I always was. A person deserving of basic dignity and respect. The badge didn't change that. It just forced you to see it. With that, he turned and walked toward the aircraft door, leaving behind the shattered remains of prejudice and assumptions, ready to face what came next. Time seemed to slow as Dominic held his FBI credentials aloft in the sterile light of the interrogation room. The gold shield caught the fluorescent glare, sending fractured reflections across the walls like shattered pieces of the officer's certainty. Officer Riggs's face transformed in stages, arrogant confidence giving way to confusion, then disbelief, and finally as reality set in naked fear. Officer Anderson took an involuntary step backward, his hand falling away from his weapon as if it had suddenly become too heavy to support. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Anderson's voice was barely above a whisper, the question hanging in the air like smoke. Special Agent Dominic Reynolds, Counterterrorism Division. Dominic confirmed, his voice steady and clear. He held their gaze, allowing the moment to stretch the weight of understanding to settle fully upon them. The small room was utterly silent. Even breathing seemed suspended as the implications rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. This is... Riggs began, but words failed him. His face had lost all color, his previous bravado vanished without a trace. A situation of your making. Dominic completed the thought for him, one with serious consequences. The locked metal box sat between them on the table, no longer an object of suspicion, but a symbol of their catastrophic error in judgment. The box contains my service weapon, Dominic explained, secured according to federal travel protocols for agents traveling undercover. Anderson swallowed visibly. Sir, we were just following procedure. The flight crew reported a security concern based on racial profiling and bias, not on any observable threat or behavior. Dominic cut him off. And rather than evaluating the situation objectively, you chose to escalate at every opportunity. We had no way of knowing you were FBI. Riggs offered weakly. You had no reason to treat me the way you did regardless of who I am. Dominic replied evenly. My badge doesn't make me more deserving of dignity than any other passenger. It just makes the consequences of your actions more severe." The door to the interrogation room suddenly opened, and a man in a suit stepped in. Clearly a supervisor, his face already set in lines of worry as he took in the scene before him. "What's going on here?" he asked, then froze as his eyes landed on Dominic's credentials still displayed. "David Chen, Airport Security Director." He introduced himself automatically, his voice tight with sudden anxiety. "Special Agent Dominic Reynolds, FBI." Dominic replied. "And we have a serious situation developing." Chen's eyes darted between his officers and Dominic quickly assessing. "I just received a call from the FBI Charlotte field office. They're sending agents." "They're already here," came a voice from the doorway. All eyes turned to see a woman in a dark suit standing there, her own credentials displayed. "Special Agent Gabriela Ramirez, Charlotte field office." She entered the room, her gaze taking in the scene with professional efficiency before settling on Dominic. "Agent Reynolds, Director Palmer sends his regards and his concern. He's been briefed on the situation." Dominic nodded. "Thank you for responding so quickly, Agent Ramirez." She turned to the security director. "Mr. Chen, we'll need your officers debriefed and processed immediately. This incident potentially compromises an ongoing federal investigation of significant national security importance." Chen's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Of course, whatever you need. Officers Riggs and Anderson will cooperate fully." Ramirez's expression was stone. "They'll be escorted to separate rooms for questioning. Their body cameras are to be surrendered immediately. All footage secured." Chen nodded rapidly. "Yes, absolutely." Dominic watched the exchange, noting the swift transformation of power dynamics in the room. The men who had manhandled and threatened him moments ago now stood silent and diminished, their authority stripped away by the simple revelation of who he actually was. Ramirez turned back to Dominic. "Agent Reynolds, we should move to a secure location. There are several matters requiring immediate attention." Dominic nodded, standing up and reclaiming his backpack. As he did, his phone vibrated with an incoming call, his sister Kiana wondering why he hadn't landed in Atlanta yet. The reminder of his father's condition sent a pang through him, sharpening his focus. "Agent Ramirez, while this situation is being contained, I need to make arrangements to continue to Atlanta as soon as possible. Family emergency." "Already arranged," she replied efficiently. "We have a Bureau aircraft standing by. But first, we need to address the situation on United Airways 837. The passengers, the recordings, the flight crew. All of it." Dominic nodded grimly. "Let's go." As they exited the interrogation room, leaving behind the stunned security officers, Dominic caught a glimpse of more FBI agents arriving, moving with purposeful efficiency through the terminal. The machinery of federal response was fully engaged now, working to contain both the security breach and the public relations crisis that was surely brewing. They walked briskly through the corridor, Ramirez briefing him as they moved. Initial assessment shows at least 12 passengers recorded the incident. Social media uploads have already begun. We're working on containment, but it's likely too late. Dominic finished for her. "The videos are out there." "Yes," she confirmed. "Director Palmer is preparing a statement categorizing this as part of a security training exercise, but with this many witnesses and recordings, it won't hold." Dominic agreed. "The truth will emerge. We need to get ahead of it." They reached a door leading back to the terminal, where they could see the jetway extending to the aircraft. United Airways Flight 837 sat on the tarmac, passengers still on board, unaware of the dramatic revelations taking place. "Captain Thompson and the flight crew?" Dominic asked. Waiting to be interviewed, Ramirez replied, "As is the passenger who initiated the complaint. A William Preston, according to the manifest." At the mention of Preston's name, Dominic felt a surge of cold anger quickly controlled. He should be handled separately. His false allegations were deliberate and malicious. Ramirez nodded. Noted. How do you want to proceed with the aircraft? Dominic considered for a moment. I want to return to the cabin. The passengers deserve to see the resolution, especially those who spoke up. As they approached the jetway entrance, Dominic spotted Captain Thompson standing with another FBI agent, his face ashen. When he saw Dominic approaching, Thompson straightened his expression, a mix of dread and shame. Agent Reynolds Thompson began, I want to... Not now. Captain Dominic cut him off. First, we address your passengers and crew. Then we'll discuss your role in this incident. Thompson nodded, mutely defeated. Dominic turned to Ramirez. Let's proceed to the aircraft. As they walked down the jetway, Dominic felt the weight of his badge in his pocket, a symbol of authority that should never have been necessary to invoke for basic human dignity. But now that it had been revealed, it carried a power that would reshape the lives of everyone involved in this incident. What awaited him on the plane was a reckoning, not just for those who had wronged him, but for a system that had allowed such wrongs to occur in the first place. The return to the aircraft cabin felt like stepping onto a stage. As Dominic entered through the front door, followed by Agent Ramirez and 2 additional FBI agents, a hush fell over the previously murmuring passengers. All eyes turned to him, recognition flickering as they connected the man who had been forcibly removed with the composed figure now standing in the aisle, authority radiating from his posture. Heather Wilson. The flight attendant who had been so dismissive earlier stood frozen by the galley, her eyes widening as she took in the FBI agents flanking Dominic. The blood drained from her face as understanding dawned. Captain Thompson entered behind them, visibly uncomfortable. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice lacking its previous confidence. I need to inform you of a development regarding our unscheduled landing. Dominic stepped forward, effectively taking control of the situation. I'll handle this, Captain. He turned to address the cabin, his voice clear and carrying easily to the back rows. My name is Special Agent Dominic Reynolds of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Many of you witnessed my removal from this aircraft approximately 30 minutes ago following allegations of suspicious behavior. A buzz of whispers swept through the cabin as passengers processed this information. Those allegations, Dominic continued, were false and unsubstantiated, based on racial profiling rather than any legitimate security concern. As a result, this flight was unnecessarily diverted, and a federal officer was prevented from carrying out his duties. From his seat in 26C, William Preston seemed to shrink into himself, suddenly very interested in his shoes. Jessica Martinez, still in 26A, was recording everything, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The situation, Dominic went on, has been addressed, and those responsible will be held accountable. FBI agents will be taking statements from passengers in rows 24 through 28, as well as anyone else who directly witnessed the interactions leading to my removal. Agent Ramirez stepped forward. We also request that anyone who recorded any part of the incident share those recordings with our agents. This is a matter of potential national security importance. A hand went up from a few rows back. Are we still going to Atlanta? A woman asked. Yes, Dominic assured her. After statements are taken, this flight will continue to its destination. For those with tight connections, alternative arrangements will be made. Another passenger spoke up. What about them? He pointed toward Heather and the other flight attendants. Are they just going to get away with this? I assure you, Dominic replied, no one is getting away with anything. United Airways will be conducting a full investigation, as will the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Heather's face crumpled at this, the reality of her situation finally hitting home. One more thing, Dominic added. To those passengers who spoke up when they witnessed injustice, thank you. Your willingness to go on record made a difference. To those who remained silent or supported the removal without evidence, I hope this serves as a moment of reflection. He turned to Agent Ramirez. Let's proceed. As agents began moving through the cabin to collect statements, Dominic approached William Preston. The businessman was visibly sweating, now his earlier arrogance replaced by naked fear. "Mr. Preston," Dominic said, his voice low but carrying enough for nearby passengers to hear. "A word, please." William looked up, his face a mask of panic. "Listen, I never meant. Step into the aisle, please." William complied reluctantly, standing on shaky legs. "You deliberately made false allegations that led to the diversion of this aircraft and the interference with a federal officer's duties." Dominic stated, his tone professional but unyielding. "Those actions have consequences." "It was a misunderstanding," William protested weakly. "I genuinely thought." "No, Dominic cut him off. "You didn't think at all. You acted on bias and assumption, then fabricated a security concern to validate your prejudice." William's mouth opened and closed, no words emerging. "Agent Rodriguez will escort you from the aircraft," Dominic continued, gesturing to one of the FBI agents. "You'll be questioned regarding your statements and actions. Depending on the findings, you may face federal charges for making false statements and interfering with a federal investigation." The color drained from William's face. "Federal charges? But my business? My reputation?" "You should have considered those before lying to the flight crew," Dominic said simply. As Agent Rodriguez led a shell-shocked William Preston toward the exit, Dominic turned his attention to Jessica, who was still recording. "Thank you for speaking up," he said quietly. She lowered her phone. "I couldn't just sit there and watch it happen. It was wrong. Many people would have stayed silent." "Yeah, well, I'm not most people." She paused, then added, "I have everything recorded from the first interaction with the flight attendant to when they dragged you off. It's all there." "That evidence will be important," Dominic acknowledged. "An agent will take your statement and contact information." Next, Dominic approached the forward galley where Captain Thompson and Heather Wilson waited, both looking as though they were facing a firing squad. Captain Thompson. Flight Attendant Wilson. Dominic addressed them formally. "Agent Ramirez will be taking your statements individually. I suggest you be completely forthcoming about the decisions made today and the factors that influence them." Heather's composure finally broke. "I was just following procedure," she said, her voice quavering. "The passenger reported a security concern and You selectively enforced rules from the moment I boarded." Dominic interrupted. "You ignored identical behaviors from other passengers while scrutinizing mine. You escalated a non-situation based on bias, not evidence." "I didn't know you were FBI," she said weakly. "That shouldn't matter," Dominic replied. "Every passenger deserves the same respect and fair treatment regardless of their profession or position." Captain Thompson cleared his throat. "Agent Reynolds, as the captain of this aircraft, the responsibility for all decisions ultimately rests with me. I failed in my duty to properly assess the situation before agreeing to divert." Dominic nodded, acknowledging the captain's acceptance of responsibility. "Your statement will be taken as well, Captain. The decision to continue this flight to Atlanta will depend on whether a replacement crew is deemed necessary." As the scene in the cabin continued to unfold, agents taking statements, passengers recording and discussing in hushed tones, the flight crew coming to terms with their new reality, Dominic stepped aside to check his phone. 3 missed calls from Kiana. His heart sank. He needed to get to Atlanta, to his father's side, as soon as possible. Agent Ramirez approached him. "We've arranged for a Bureau aircraft to take you to Atlanta as soon as we're done here. Should be ready in about 30 minutes. "Thank you, Dominic," said gratitude evident in his voice. "I need to make a call first." He stepped into the now empty first-class cabin and dialed his sister. "Dom, where are you? Your flight should have landed an hour ago." Kiana's voice was tense with worry. "There was a situation with the flight. I'm in Charlotte, but I'll be in Atlanta soon. Private flight." He kept the explanation deliberately vague. How's Dad? Stable for now. The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical. He's been asking for you. Tell him I'm coming. I'll be there as fast as I can." As he ended the call, Dominic looked out the window at the airport tarmac where several FBI vehicles were now parked near the plane. What had begun as a simple flight home had transformed into something much larger. A very public collision between prejudice and justice with consequences that would ripple outward long after today. He turned back toward the cabin where Agent Ramirez was efficiently coordinating the taking of statements and securing of evidence. The machine of federal response was in full motion now, containment and investigation proceeding simultaneously. "Agent Reynolds," she called to him. "We have a situation developing online. The videos are going viral faster than we can contain them." Dominic nodded grimly. In the digital age, truth moved at the speed of light, especially when that truth exposed injustice in such a raw, undeniable form. Let it go, he decided. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against prejudice is visibility. As he watched the continued activity in the cabin, William Preston being escorted away, Heather Wilson giving her statement with tears streaming down her face, Jessica Martinez showing her recordings to an agent, Dominic felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication. Yes, but also a deep weariness at the familiar pattern this incident represented. He had won this battle decisively, but the war against prejudice and profiling continued. For now, though, his focus needed to be on his father, on family, on what truly mattered beyond badges and authority. The next phase of this incident would unfold with or without his direct involvement. The wheels of justice, once set in motion, had their own momentum. The tarmac outside Charlotte Douglas International Airport buzzed with activity. 3 FBI vehicles were parked near United Airways Flight 837, and agents moved with purposeful efficiency between the terminal and the aircraft. Inside the cabin, the investigation was in full swing. Dominic stood near the cockpit door conferring with Agent Ramirez while monitoring the scene throughout the cabin. FBI agents were methodically taking statements from passengers, collecting video evidence, and documenting the sequence of events that had led to the aircraft's diversion. "Our digital forensics team is tracking the spread of the videos online," Ramirez reported, her voice low. "They've already appeared on multiple platforms. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack is trending, and your removal has been viewed over 1 million times in the last hour." Dominic nodded, unsurprised. "Any clear shots of my face or badge?" "Several. Facial recognition is flagging them as they appear, but it's a losing battle. Your cover may be compromised." This was the outcome Dominic had feared. Exposure that could jeopardize Operation Vanguard, the domestic terrorism case that had occupied the last 18 months of his career. The Johnston faction, a violent extremist group with cells across the southeastern United States, was the target of his upcoming testimony. "If they identified him before the trial, Director Palmer is on his way," Ramirez added. "He's coordinating with the U.S. Marshals Service regarding witness protection protocols just in case." "Good," Dominic replied. "What about the flight crew and security officers all being questioned separately? The security footage from the jetway has been secured, as well as the body cam footage from Officers Riggs and Anderson." Dominic looked toward the back of the cabin where Jessica Martinez was speaking with an FBI agent, gesturing occasionally at her phone. She had become an unexpected ally in this situation, one of the few passengers who had spoken up when it mattered. "What about her?" he asked. "The woman from 26A. Jessica Martinez Ramirez confirmed. Tech developer from San Francisco. Her recordings are some of the clearest we've found. Caught nearly every interaction from your boarding to removal. When this is wrapped up, I'd like to speak with her briefly." Ramirez nodded. "Of course. She's been extremely cooperative." A commotion near the rear galley caught their attention. William Preston was being escorted back onto the aircraft by Agent Rodriguez, his face pale and his expensive suit now rumpled. He looked like a man who had seen his future collapse before his eyes. "Mr. Preston has provided a statement," Rodriguez reported as he approached. "He's admitted to fabricating the security concern after feeling disrespected during your exchange about personal space." Disrespected. Dominic repeated the word heavy with irony. "He's being processed for making false statements and interference with government operations. His attorney is already en route, apparently." "Of course he is," Dominic said dryly. The aircraft intercom suddenly activated and Captain Thompson's voice addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been informed that a relief crew is on the way to continue this flight to Atlanta. We anticipate departure within the next hour. On behalf of United Airways, I extend our sincere apologies for the delay and the circumstances that caused it." The announcement was met with a mixture of relieved sighs and skeptical murmurs from the passengers, many of whom were still recording the ongoing activity. Dominic checked his watch. The Bureau aircraft would be ready soon, offering a faster route to Atlanta and his father's hospital bed. But before he left, there was one more matter to address. He approached Jessica, who had just finished giving her statement to the FBI agent. She looked up as he neared tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "All done?" he asked. "Just finished," she confirmed. "They're keeping copies of everything I recorded." "Thank you," Dominic said sincerely. "Not just for the recordings, but for speaking up when it mattered. Most people don't." Jessica shrugged, though her expression was serious. "I couldn't just sit there. What they did was wrong, and they knew it was wrong. Sometimes you have to say something." "That courage makes a difference," Dominic told her. "More than you might realize." She studied him for a moment. "You know, even before you showed that badge, you handled yourself with incredible dignity. Most people would have lost it." Dominic smiled faintly. "My father taught me that dignity isn't what others grant you. It's what you maintain despite how they treat you. Smart man, your dad." "Yes," Dominic agreed, thoughts returning to his father's hospital bed in Atlanta. "He is." Agent Ramirez approached them. "Agent Reynolds, the Bureau aircraft is ready. We should depart within 15 minutes if you want to make that flight." Dominic nodded. "Thank you." He turned back to Jessica. "Safe travels to Atlanta." "You too," she replied. "I hope, whatever's waiting for you there, I hope it goes well." With a final nod of appreciation, Dominic moved toward the front of the aircraft where Heather Wilson stood with another flight attendant, both watching him with a mixture of fear and shame. "Ms. Wilson," he acknowledged her as he passed. "Agent Reynolds," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to apologize for—" "Not now," he interrupted gently. "There will be time for that later in the appropriate forum. Right now, I suggest you focus on cooperating fully with the investigation." She nodded mutely, tears welling in her eyes. As Dominic exited the aircraft, he found Airport Security Director Chen waiting in the jetway, his expression grave. "Agent Reynolds," Chen began. "I want to personally apologize for the actions of my officers. Their behavior was completely unacceptable and does not reflect the standards of our security force, Mr. Chen." Dominic replied evenly. "I appreciate the sentiment, but the issue goes deeper than individual actions. This was a failure of training of culture and of accountability. Officers Riggs and Anderson didn't act in a vacuum." Chen nodded soberly. "You're right, of course. We have serious work to do." "Yes, you do," Dominic agreed. "And that work begins with acknowledging that what happened today wasn't an anomaly or a misunderstanding. It was the predictable outcome of unchecked bias in a system that enables profiling rather than preventing it." The security director had no response to this truth, offering only another nod of chastened agreement. Dominic continued through the terminal, accompanied by Agent Ramirez toward the separate area where the Bureau aircraft awaited. As they walked, heads turned, passengers recognizing him from the videos that were now circulating widely online. "Your face is out there now," Ramirez observed quietly. "Operation Vanguard may need to be restructured. Probably Dominic agreed, but that's a problem for tomorrow. Right now, I need to get to my father. They reached the private aviation section of the airport where Director Anthony Palmer himself waited beside a sleek jet bearing the FBI insignia. The director, a tall, distinguished man in his early 60s with silver hair and a commanding presence, stepped forward as Dominic approached. Reynolds Palmer greeted him, extending his hand. "Quite a situation you found yourself in." "Not by choice, sir," Dominic replied as they shook hands. "Never is Palmer," agreed grimly. "Walk with me." As they moved toward the aircraft, the director spoke in low tones. "The videos are everywhere. We can't put that genie back in the bottle. Your testimony in the Vanguard case next week is now compromised." "I understand, sir. Alternative arrangements already in motion. U.S. Marshals are preparing a security detail for your family as well, just as a precaution." Dominic felt a chill at the mention of his family. "My sister and father need to be briefed immediately." "It's being handled," Palmer assured him. "In the meantime, this incident has created another kind of opportunity. The Bureau has been trying to address profiling in air travel for years. Your experience, captured so clearly on video and witnessed by dozens, provides irrefutable evidence of the problem. With respect, sir, I'm more concerned about my father's health than being the poster child for anti-discrimination initiatives right now." Palmer nodded understandingly. "Of course. Family first. But when you're ready, we should discuss how to leverage this situation for positive change." They reached the steps of the aircraft where two more agents waited. Palmer placed a hand on Dominic's shoulder. "Get to your father, Reynolds. We'll handle the fallout here." "Thank you, sir." As Dominic boarded the FBI jet, his phone vibrated with an incoming message from his sister Dad's asking for you. "Hurry." With renewed urgency, he settled into his seat, thoughts turning toward Atlanta and away from the storm he was leaving behind in Charlotte, a storm that would continue to grow and spread long after his departure. The investigation had only just begun, but the truth was already emerging, pixel by pixel, witness by witness, revealing a reality that could no longer be denied or ignored. The sterile conference room in the Charlotte FBI field office hummed with tense silence. Around the large table sat the key figures in what had now been officially classified as the United Airways 837 incident. Captain Richard Thompson, Flight Attendant Heather Wilson, Security Officers James Riggs and Tyler Anderson, and William Preston. Each had been questioned separately for hours before being brought together for this final confrontation. At the head of the table sat Director Anthony Palmer, his expression grave. To his right was Agent Gabriela Ramirez, and to his left an empty chair, a chair that commanded the attention of everyone present through its very emptiness. The door opened and Dominic Reynolds entered. He had changed from his casual travel clothes into a crisp, dark suit, his FBI badge now openly displayed on his belt. The transformation was striking. From the unassuming passenger they had discriminated against to the federal agent whose authority now held their fates in balance. Agent Reynolds Palmer acknowledged, gesturing to the empty seat. "Thank you for returning from Atlanta." Dominic nodded and took his place, his expression revealing nothing of the emotional 24 hours he had spent at his father's hospital bedside before being called back to Charlotte. "Let's begin," Palmer said, addressing the group. "You've all been questioned individually about your roles in yesterday's incident. You've provided statements and had opportunities to consult with legal representation. This meeting is not about gathering additional evidence. It's about understanding consequences." The word hung in the air like a blade. Agent Reynolds Palmer continued, "Would you like to address the participants?" Dominic surveyed the faces around the table. Thompson looked resigned, his captain's authority diminished to nothing. Heather Wilson's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Riggs and Anderson sat stiffly still, clinging to some semblance of professional pride. William Preston looked like a man watching his life crumble in real time. His expensive suit now rumpled, his confident demeanor shattered. Yesterday, Dominic began his voice calm, but carrying undeniable weight. Each of you made a series of decisions that resulted in the violation of my civil rights, the compromise of a federal investigation, and the public humiliation of an innocent traveler. Those decisions were not made in isolation, nor were they simple mistakes. They were the product of bias, unchecked authority, and a culture that enables discrimination rather than preventing it. No one at the table made eye contact. The truth of his words was undeniable. Captain Thompson Dominic turned his attention to the pilot. You diverted an entire aircraft based on a security concern that was never verified, never documented, and never legitimate. You accepted the word of your flight attendant without question and authorized the removal of a passenger without ever speaking to them directly. Thompson nodded slowly. Yes, sir. I failed in my duty as captain to ensure fair treatment of all passengers. Ms. Wilson. Dominic continued shifting his gaze to the flight attendant. From the moment I boarded, you applied different standards to me than to other passengers. You scrutinized my compliance while ignoring identical behaviors from others. You escalated a non-situation based on bias rather than evidence. Heather's eyes filled with fresh tears. I didn't think I was. That's precisely the problem, Dominic said evenly. You didn't think about your biases. You acted on them without reflection or consideration. He turned to the security officers. Officers Riggs and Anderson, you had multiple opportunities to assess the situation objectively. Instead, you chose physical force and intimidation from the outset, ignoring witness statements that contradicted your assumptions. You treated me as a threat without evidence, using your authority to demean rather than protect. Riggs shifted uncomfortably. We were following protocol based on the information provided by the flight crew. Protocol does not override common sense or basic rights, Dominic countered. Your badges gave you responsibility, not immunity. Finally, he faced William Preston, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. And Mr. Preston, you deliberately fabricated a security concern because you were uncomfortable sitting next to someone who didn't look or act the way you thought they should. Your false allegations diverted an aircraft, delayed hundreds of passengers, and potentially compromised national security. Preston swallowed hard. I never intended intentions don't erase consequences, Dominic interrupted. Your actions have serious implications, both legally and professionally. Director Palmer took over. Those consequences are what we're here to discuss. He opened a folder in front of him. United Airways has terminated the employment of both Captain Thompson and Flight Attendant Wilson, effective immediately. Officers Riggs and Anderson have been placed on administrative leave pending termination proceedings by the airport authority. The news, while not unexpected, still landed heavily on those affected. Heather let out a small sob. Additionally, Palmer continued, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division has opened an investigation into the incident. Each of you may face civil and potentially criminal charges for your roles in this event. William Preston found his voice, though it quavered. Criminal charges? But I'm a private citizen. I just reported what I thought was suspicious. You made false statements that led to the diversion of an aircraft and the interference with a federal officer. Palmer replied coolly. Those actions fall under several federal statutes, Mr. Preston. My company, my reputation. Preston's voice trailed off. Should have been considerations before you lied. Dominic completed the thought for him. Actions have consequences. A heavy silence fell over the room as the full weight of those consequences settled on each person present. Captain Thompson finally spoke. I made a decision based on incomplete information. I failed in my duty as captain to ensure fair treatment of all passengers. He looked directly at Dominic for the first time. I have no excuse to offer, only an apology that I know is insufficient. Dominic acknowledged this with a slight nod, appreciating the captain's straightforward acceptance of responsibility. Heather Wilson wiped her eyes. I've lost everything, she said quietly. My career, my income, my future. And what did I lose? Dominic asked her. My dignity. my rights, my humanity. The opportunity to reach my father's hospital bed when he needed me. Heather had no response, her gaze dropping back to her hands. Officer Riggs cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Agent Reynolds, I've learned a painful lesson from this incident, one I won't forget. Lessons shouldn't require victims, Dominic replied. But if this experience truly changes how you approach your authority in the future, perhaps some good will come of it. Palmer closed his folder. This incident has attracted national attention. The videos have been viewed millions of times. Congressional representatives are calling for hearings on profiling in air travel. What happened on Flight 837 may prove to be a catalyst for long overdue changes in how airlines and security personnel operate. Small comfort to those who've experienced this treatment without a badge to protect them, Dominic observed. True, Palmer agreed, which is why the Bureau is establishing a task force to address these issues more comprehensively. Agent Reynolds, when you're ready, we'd like you to be part of that initiative. Dominic nodded thoughtfully. His father had always taught him that change required both pressure and presence. Pressure to expose injustice and presence to help shape the solutions. One final note, Palmer addressed the group. While the professional and legal consequences of your actions will continue to unfold, I hope each of you takes this opportunity to reflect deeply on the biases that influenced your decisions. Real change begins with that recognition. With that, the meeting was concluded. As the participants were led out by other agents, Dominic remained seated, processing the confrontation that had just occurred. "How's your father?" Palmer asked when they were alone. "Stable," Dominic replied. "The doctors are cautiously optimistic. He's tough," like his son Palmer observed. "You handled this situation with remarkable composure, Reynolds. Many agents would have revealed their credentials immediately to avoid the humiliation, and missed the opportunity to document a pattern of behavior that affects countless travelers who don't have badges to protect them." Dominic shook his head. "Sometimes the most powerful evidence comes from letting bias play out in the open." Palmer nodded thoughtfully. "Operation Vanguard has been restructured. Your testimony will now be handled differently. Video deposition enhanced security protocols. The U.S. Marshals are maintaining surveillance on your family as a precaution." "Thank you, sir." "When do you return to Atlanta?" "Tonight," Dominic said. "My father's asking for me." "Of course. Take whatever time you need. Family comes first." Palmer stood extending his hand. "Your actions in this situation, while personally difficult, may end up changing air travel policies for the better. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places." As they shook hands, Dominic thought about the cascade of consequences that had flowed from a simple flight home, consequences that would continue to ripple outward long after today's confrontation. The perpetrators had been faced, the truth acknowledged. Now the harder work of actual change could begin. The FBI Gulfstream jet cut through the evening sky, its sleek form illuminated by the setting sun as it approached Atlanta. Inside, Dominic Reynolds sat alone, watching the city lights emerge through the gathering dusk. In the 24 hours since the confrontation in Charlotte, the United Airways 837 incident had exploded across national media, becoming a flashpoint in discussions about racial profiling, airline security protocols, and the abuse of authority. Dominic's phone buzzed with another news alert: FBI agent profiled and removed from United Flight, congressional hearing announced. He scrolled through the article briefly before turning off the screen. The story had taken on a life of its own, now beyond his control or influence. His thoughts returned to his father, Robert Reynolds, lying in a hospital bed across town. During his brief visit before being called back to Charlotte, Robert had been weak but lucid, his eyes still sharp despite his failing heart. "So, they threw you off the plane, huh?" his father had asked, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips. "News travels fast," Dominic had replied. "Kiana showed me the video. You handled yourself well, didn't lose your composure." I had a good teacher. Robert had nodded slowly. Dignity under fire. The only thing they can never take from you. Those words echoed in Dominic's mind as the aircraft began its descent. Dignity under fire. It had been his father's mantra throughout a life marked by both achievement and adversity. The first black principal of Atlanta's largest high school facing resistance and resentment with unwavering composure. The jet touched down smoothly at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, taxiing toward the private aviation terminal. As Dominic prepared to disembark, the pilot emerged from the cockpit. Agent Reynolds, the pilot, addressed him with noticeable respect. "We've been instructed to inform you that there's a car waiting to take you directly to Emory University Hospital. Director Palmer's orders." "Thank you," Dominic replied, appreciating the consideration. As he descended the aircraft steps, he was met by a young agent who introduced herself as Special Agent Tessa Collins. "I'll be driving you to the hospital, sir," she explained, leading him toward a black SUV. "Director Palmer also wanted me to provide you with an update on the situation." Once they were in the vehicle and moving through evening traffic, Collins continued. "The videos from Flight 837 have now been viewed over 20 million times across various platforms. United Airways stock dropped 15% today. They've issued a formal apology and announced a comprehensive review of their training and security protocols." Dominic nodded, unsurprised by the corporate fallout. "And William Preston. His firm, Preston Financial Solutions, has placed him on indefinite leave. Their statement distances the company from his actions, citing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. The speed with which consequences had manifested was notable but not unexpected. In the digital age, public opinion moved swiftly, and corporate entities responded in kind, if only to protect their own interests. What about the passenger who recorded everything Jessica Martinez Dominic asked? She's been interviewed by several news outlets. She's become something of a spokesperson for bystander intervention, encouraging people to speak up when they witness injustice. That was an unexpected but welcome development. Allies who spoke up when it mattered were rare and valuable. And Operation Vanguard. This was Dominic's primary professional concern. The Johnston faction appears unaware of your identity or your connection to the case. The U.S. Marshals have established a security perimeter around the hospital as a precaution, but there's been no indication of threat. Good Dominic said, relief evident in his voice. The last thing his father needed was to become a target due to Dominic's work. They drove in silence for a while, the Atlanta skyline glowing against the night sky. Finally, Collins spoke again, her tone more personal. "Sir, if I may, what happened on that flight? It's changed things. Inside the Bureau, I mean. There's been a lot of discussion, especially among agents of color. Your handling of the situation has become a kind of case study in maintaining professional integrity while facing discrimination." Dominic considered this. It shouldn't take a badge to earn basic respect or fair treatment. "No, sir, it shouldn't." Collins agreed. "But your experience has made the issue impossible to ignore, even for those who might have preferred to look the other way." They arrived at Emory University Hospital, where two plainclothes U.S. Marshals stood discreetly near the entrance. They nodded respectfully to Dominic as he approached one of them, speaking quietly into his wrist microphone to alert others of his arrival. "Would you like me to wait?" Sir Collins asked. "No need," Dominic replied. "I'll be here until morning. Thank you for the update and the ride." As he entered the hospital, a nurse at the reception desk looked up, recognition flashing across her face. "Agent Reynolds," she said, standing. "Your sister is expecting you. I'll take you up." The deference was new, a response not to him as a person, but to his now public identity as the FBI agent from the viral videos. It was a strange feeling, this sudden visibility after years of cultivated anonymity. The elevator rose smoothly to the cardiac care unit where Kiana waited in the corridor outside their father's room. She embraced him tightly. "You're all over the news," she whispered. Dad's been watching. He's proud of you, though he won't say it directly. How is he? Dominic asked the only question that truly mattered to him in that moment. Better. The new medication seems to be working. His blood pressure has stabilized. She stepped back, studying her brother's face. And you? How are you holding up with all this attention? Dominic shrugged slightly. It's not about me anymore. It's become something bigger. It was always something bigger, Kiana corrected him. You just happened to be the one who exposed it in a way people couldn't ignore. They entered the hospital room together. Robert Reynolds lay propped up in bed, an array of monitors tracking his vital signs. Despite his condition, his eyes were alert and focused, brightening as they fell on his son. There he is, Robert said, his voice weak but warm. The man who shut down an airline with just a badge. The airline's still operating? Dad Dominic replied with a small smile, just with a few less employees than before. Sit down, tell me everything, Robert insisted. The news only gives half the story. As Dominic settled into the chair beside his father's bed, he felt the weight of the past 2 days begin to lift. Here in this quiet room with the two people who knew him best, he wasn't Agent Reynolds of the viral video, or the catalyst for a national conversation about profiling. He was simply a son, a brother, a man returning to the foundation that had shaped his character and principles. The journey that had begun on United Airways Flight 837 would continue long after this moment, rippling through policies, practices, and public consciousness. But for now, Dominic was exactly where he needed to be, not fighting injustice or confronting perpetrators, but simply being present for the man who had taught him the meaning of dignity under fire. The most important journey, after all, had never been about reaching Atlanta. It had been about honoring the values that had guided him there through turbulence, both literal and metaphorical, toward a truth that could no longer be denied. 3 days after the incident on United Airways Flight 837, Dominic sat beside his father's hospital bed, a tablet in hand, scrolling through the cascade of developments that had followed his removal from the aircraft. Robert Reynolds was recovering steadily, his condition upgraded from critical to stable, allowing Dominic to divide his attention between family care and professional aftermath. Look at this, Dominic said, turning the tablet so his father could see the screen. United Airways CEO Thomas Miller just announced a comprehensive overhaul of their training protocols and security procedures. Robert adjusted his glasses to read the statement. What occurred on Flight 837 represents a profound failure of our values and standards. We are implementing immediate changes to ensure such discrimination never again occurs on our aircraft. Words, Robert commented skeptically. Companies are good at words when the cameras are rolling. There's more, Dominic continued. They've appointed an independent oversight committee to review all passenger removal incidents from the past 5 years, specifically looking for patterns of bias. And they've committed to publishing the findings along with concrete steps for reform. Robert raised an eyebrow, impressed, despite his skepticism. That's more substantial. Public accountability makes a difference. The hospital room television, muted but visible from the bed, showed a news anchor speaking earnestly, the chyron below, reading FBI agent profiled congressional hearings scheduled. Video footage of the Charlotte airport played beside her, showing Dominic being escorted by security officers. You're famous now, Robert observed dryly. How's that working out for Operation Vanguard? Dominic set down the tablet with a sigh. It's complicated. My testimony has been restructured. Video deposition instead of in-person appearance. Additional security protocols. The trial proceeds next week, but my role in it has changed significantly. And the Johnston faction. No indication they've identified me yet, but the Bureau isn't taking chances. Hence the U.S. Marshals outside your door. Robert nodded thoughtfully. A small price to pay for the changes this incident might bring about. That's what Director Palmer said. Dominic agreed. He called it a catalyst moment, when public attention creates an opportunity for reforms that were previously impossible to implement. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Kiana entered carrying a tray of coffee cups. "You two solving the world's problems again?" she asked with affectionate mockery. "Just watching your brother's newfound celebrity status unfold," Robert replied, gesturing toward the television. Kiana handed them each a coffee. "It's not just the airline, you know. This story has touched a nerve everywhere. People are sharing their own experiences with profiling, in stores, at security checkpoints, and first-class cabins. It's like a dam broke." Dominic nodded soberly. "What happened to me happens to people every day. The only difference is I had a badge that forced them to confront their biases." "And cameras," Kiana added. "Don't underestimate the power of those videos. Seeing discrimination happen in real time, watching your composure against their escalating hostility, it creates an undeniable record." The tablet chimed with another news alert. Dominic glanced at the screen. William Preston's firm has officially terminated his employment. Their statement cites conduct incompatible with our core values and announces a company-wide initiative on unconscious bias training. "Another corporate conversion," Robert remarked. "Amazing how quickly values clarify when profits are threatened." Cynical but accurate, Dominic agreed. Still, change is change, regardless of motivation. Kiana's phone buzzed. She checked the screen, her eyebrows rising in surprise. "It's Jessica Martinez, the woman who sat next to you on the flight. She's asking if you'd be willing to participate in a panel discussion she's organizing on bystander intervention and accountability." "How did she get your number?" Dominic asked. "Through Agent Ramirez, apparently. The FBI seems to be encouraging this connection." Dominic considered the request. Jessica had been one of the few passengers to speak up when it mattered documenting the discrimination, when others had remained silent or complicit. Her initiative to expand that individual action into a broader movement was commendable. "Tell her I'll consider it once Dad's condition is more stable," he decided. "And thank her again for her courage on the flight." Robert shifted in his bed, adjusting to a more upright position. "You should do it," he said firmly. "This moment won't last forever. The public's attention will shift to the next crisis, the next scandal. The time to push for real change is now, while people are still listening." Dominic recognized the familiar determination in his father's voice, the same tone that had pushed for integration of faculty housing at his high school in the 1970s, that had demanded curriculum reforms in the 1980s, that had never stopped believing in the possibility of progress, however incremental. "You're right," Dominic acknowledged. "As always." The tablet chimed again with another news alert. "Airport security officers fired. Civil rights investigation launched." "Officers Riggs and Anderson?" Kiana asked. Dominic nodded, scanning the article. "The Charlotte Airport Authority terminated them this morning. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division has opened a formal investigation into their actions and the broader patterns of enforcement at the airport." "And what about the flight attendant?" "The one who started all this?" Robert asked. "Heather Wilson." Dominic supplied the name. "She was fired immediately. According to this, she's issued a public apology and has requested to meet with me personally." "Are you going to do it?" Kiana asked. Dominic was silent for a moment, weighing the question. "I'm not sure yet. Part of me thinks it would just be performative, more about alleviating her guilt than creating actual change. Or it could be a genuine opportunity for her to learn," Robert suggested. "People can change when confronted with the consequences of their actions. Not all, but some." "I'll think about it," Dominic promised. The television in this corner switched to a new segment showing the United Airways corporate headquarters, surrounded by protesters, carrying signs with messages like, "Flying while black shouldn't be a crime and accountability now." The movement had grown beyond Dominic's individual experience, evolving into a broader demand for fundamental reforms. "Congress is holding hearings next month," Dominic noted, reading another update. The House Transportation Committee wants me to testify about the incident and its implications for air travel regulations." "Will you do it?" Kiana asked. "If it might help create actual change, yes." Dominic set down the tablet, suddenly weary of the constant updates and escalating attention. "But right now my priority is right here in this room." Robert reached out, placing his hand over his son's. "I'm not going anywhere just yet," he assured him. "The doctors say the new medication is working. My heart's stronger than they expected." "Stubborn, you mean?" Kiana corrected with affectionate exasperation. "Reynolds' men don't give up easily." Robert agreed with a small smile. "Whether it's fighting heart failure or challenging discrimination at 30,000 feet. The afternoon sun slanted through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, beyond the glass and the confines of this quiet space, the wider impact of United Airways Flight 837 continued to unfold. In corporate boardrooms, government hearings, social media discussions, and individual reflections. What had begun as one man's humiliating removal from an aircraft had catalyzed a national conversation about who belongs in which spaces, whose comfort matters, and how bias shapes everyday interactions. The videos continued to circulate, the hashtags continued to trend, and the pressure for substantive change continued to build. For Dominic, watching this unfold from his father's hospital room, the wider impact was both gratifying and sobering. The incident had exposed truths that many had long denied or minimized. It had created openings for reforms that might otherwise have remained impossible. It had transformed his own career trajectory in ways yet to be fully determined. But most importantly, it had validated the principle his father had instilled in him from childhood, that dignity maintained in the face of injustice was not just a personal virtue but a powerful catalyst for change. Sometimes the most effective response to discrimination wasn't outrage or retaliation, but the steady, undeniable witness of one's own humanity, a truth that no badge, uniform, or authority could diminish. As the day's light faded into evening, Dominic remained beside his father, their conversation shifting from the public aftermath to family matters, personal memories, and quiet reflections. The wider world, with all its reactions and repercussions, could wait. For now, what mattered most was here in this room, in the presence of the man who had taught him how to stand tall when others tried to diminish him. The journey that had begun on United Airways Flight 837 was far from over, its ultimate destination still unknown. But in this moment of pause and connection, Dominic found renewed clarity about the path forward, not just for himself, but for all those who would benefit from the changes his experience might help bring about. 1 week after the incident on United Airways Flight 837, as autumn leaves drifted past the hospital window, Robert Reynolds was discharged from Emory University Hospital. His condition, while still requiring careful monitoring, had stabilized enough for him to return home. Dominic stood beside his father's wheelchair, standard hospital protocol, despite Robert's insistence that he could walk perfectly well on his own. "This is unnecessary," Robert grumbled, though there was no real annoyance in his tone. "Hospital policy," Dominic reminded him. "Besides, consider it a rare opportunity to be chauffeured by an FBI agent." "There's nothing rare about it anymore," Robert replied wryly. "I've got U.S. Marshals watching my house, and FBI agents checking my mail. I'm the most securely guarded retired high school principal in Georgia." Kiana walked alongside them, carrying a bag of medications and discharge papers. "The security is temporary, Dad. Just until Dominic's testimony in the Johnston case is complete." I know," Robert conceded. Small price to pay considering the alternatives. They reached the hospital exit where a black SUV waited, a plainclothes U.S. Marshal standing beside it. The Marshal nodded respectfully as they approached. "Mr. Reynolds," he greeted Robert. "Agent Reynolds, Ms. Reynolds. Everything's secure." As they helped Robert into the vehicle, Dominic noticed a small group of reporters gathered at the edge of the hospital property, cameras raised as they recognized him. The United Airways incident remained front-page news, with public interest intensifying rather than diminishing as new details emerged. "Your fan club is here," Robert noted as Dominic slid into the seat beside him. "Not my choice," Dominic replied, signaling to the marshal to drive. The SUV pulled away from the hospital, leaving the reporters behind. As they traveled through Atlanta toward Robert's home in the historic West End neighborhood, the three Reynolds sat in comfortable silence, each processing the events of the past week in their own way. Finally, Robert spoke. "I watched all the videos, you know. Every angle, every moment. Kiana showed them to me." Dominic glanced at his sister, who shrugged unapologetically. He insisted she said. "I wanted to see exactly what happened," Robert continued. "Wanted to see how my son handled himself when faced with the same garbage I've dealt with my whole life." There was something in his father's tone, a note of assessment that made Dominic straighten slightly as he had as a boy when Robert was about to deliver an important lesson or evaluation. And Dominic asked. A smile spread slowly across Robert's face. Not the polite, measured smile he showed to the world, but the full, genuine expression of pride he reserved for his children's greatest achievements. "You did good, son. Real good. You stood your ground without losing your dignity. You let them reveal themselves without stooping to their level. You used the power you had not just for yourself, but to expose a truth that might help others." The words washed over Dominic like a blessing settling deep in places that even his professional accomplishments had never quite reached. His father's approval had always mattered more than any commendation or recognition the Bureau could offer. "I had a good teacher," Dominic said simply. Robert nodded, acknowledging the tribute. "You remember what I told you when you were 12? After that security guard followed us through Macy's." "I remember," Dominic confirmed. It had been one of those formative moments, watching his father dignified in a well-pressed suit being treated like a potential thief while white shoppers browsed unbothered. "You said dignity isn't what others grant you. It's what you maintain despite how they treat you." "That's right," Robert agreed. But there was a second part to that lesson, one I maybe didn't emphasize enough. Dignity maintained isn't just a personal victory. It's a powerful witness. It forces others to see their own behavior reflected back at them, stripped of justification or excuse. The SUV turned onto Roberts Street, a tree-lined avenue of historic homes that had once been the center of Atlanta's black professional community. The marshal checked mirrors and sight lines with professional vigilance before pulling into the driveway of Robert's Victorian-style house, where another security detail waited discreetly. As they helped Robert from the vehicle, he continued his thought. "What you did on that plane, maintaining your composure while they showed themselves for who they are, that wasn't just about protecting yourself. It created a record that no one can deny or explain away. That's the real power of dignity under fire." Inside the house, with its familiar scents and sounds, the atmosphere relaxed noticeably. Robert settled into his favorite armchair in the living room, while Kiana went to prepare lunch and the security personnel established their positions outside. Dominic sat across from his father, considering his words. "The Bureau wants me to become the face of their new initiative on transportation security reform," he said after a moment. "Director Palmer believes my experience could drive meaningful changes in training and protocols." "And how do you feel about that?" Robert asked. "Conflicted," Dominic admitted. "On one hand, it's an opportunity to create real change in a system that affects thousands of people every day. On the other hand, you didn't ask to become a symbol or a cause." Robert completed the thought. "You were just trying to get home to your family." "Exactly." Robert studied his son thoughtfully. "You know, when I became the first black principal at Westwood High, I faced a similar choice. I could either be just a principal Focus on my job, avoid controversy, keep my head down. Or I could use my position to change the system from within to create opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise. You chose the latter, Dominic noted. I did, Robert confirmed. Not because I wanted attention or acclaim, but because the position gave me leverage to effect change that would outlast my tenure. Sometimes the platform we're given, whether we sought it or not, comes with a responsibility to use it well. Dominic nodded, absorbing his father's wisdom. Jessica Martinez, the woman who sat next to me on the flight and recorded everything. She started an organization focused on bystander intervention, teaching people how to speak up when they witness discrimination. She's asked me to be involved. Smart woman, Robert commented. Identified the real problem, not just the perpetrators but the silent witnesses who enable them. I'm considering accepting her invitation, Dominic said. Once the Johnston case is complete and the security concerns are resolved. Robert smiled approvingly. Good. This moment won't last forever. The attention will shift, the outrage will fade. The time to create lasting change is now while people are still watching and listening. From the kitchen came the sounds of Kiana preparing lunch, the familiar domestic rhythm, a counterpoint to the weight of their conversation. Through the window, Dominic could see the U.S. Marshal positioned on the porch, vigilant but unobtrusive. You know, Robert said after a comfortable silence, your mother would have been proud of how you handled yourself. She always said you had her cool head and my stubborn principles, a dangerous combination. The mention of his mother, gone now for 15 years, brought a bittersweet smile to Dominic's face. I wish she could have seen it. She did, Robert said with quiet certainty. Maybe not the way we see things, but she saw it. Kiana called them to lunch, and as they gathered around the dining table, a family reunited after crisis surrounded by the invisible protection of federal agents, Dominic felt a sense of resolution settling within him. The incident on United Airways Flight 837 had been many things, humiliating, unjust, potentially dangerous to his undercover status. But it had also been clarifying, revealing both the persistent reality of discrimination and the potential for change when that reality was exposed to the light of public scrutiny. Whatever came next, congressional testimony policy reforms, public advocacy, would build upon the foundation his father had laid decades ago. The understanding that dignity was not just a personal virtue, but a powerful catalyst for change, and that sometimes the most effective response to injustice was not outrage or retaliation, but the steady, undeniable witness of one's own humanity. As they shared a meal in the safety of home, Dominic found peace in this personal resolution, not an end to the journey that had begun on Flight 837, but a meaningful waypoint on a path that stretched far beyond a single incident or individual experience. 2 months after the incident on United Airways Flight 837, Dominic Reynolds stood at the podium in a packed congressional hearing room, the seal of the House Transportation Committee displayed prominently behind him. Camera flashes punctuated the solemn atmosphere as he prepared to deliver his testimony on discriminatory practices in commercial air travel. Agent Reynolds began, Representative Elaine Harrington, chair of the committee. Thank you for appearing before us today. Would you please describe for the committee the events that transpired on United Airways Flight 837 on September 15th of this year? Dominic leaned slightly toward the microphone. Chairwoman Harrington, members of the committee, what occurred on Flight 837 was not an isolated incident or a simple misunderstanding. It was the predictable outcome of a system that enables profiling rather than preventing it. For the next 20 minutes, he provided a detailed, measured account of the events, from the initial discriminatory treatment by flight attendant Heather Wilson, through William Preston's fabricated security concerns to the physical removal by officers Riggs and Anderson. His testimony was precise, unemotional, and devastating in its clarity. The issue before this committee, he concluded, is not about one passenger's experience, but about the thousands of travelers who face similar treatment without the protection of a badge or the platform to seek accountability. This is about whether our transportation systems truly serve all Americans equally, or whether they perpetuate and enable the very biases they should be working to eliminate. As he finished speaking, a hushed silence fell over the hearing room, broken only by the continued clicks of camera shutters. The power of his testimony lay not in emotional appeals or dramatic flourishes, but in the undeniable truth of lived experience presented with dignity and purpose. Representative Harrington nodded gravely. "Thank you, Agent Reynolds. Your testimony today will inform our committee's recommendations for regulatory reforms in airline security protocols and passenger rights." The hearing continued with additional witnesses, including Jessica Martinez, who had become a prominent advocate for bystander intervention since the incident. Her organization, Speak Up in Transit. SUIT had already trained over 5,000 people in techniques for safely intervening when witnessing discrimination in transportation settings. Ms. Martinez asked Representative Carlos Mendez what motivated you to record the incident and speak up when so many other passengers remained silent. Jessica adjusted her glasses thoughtfully. "I couldn't be complicit in something I knew was wrong. When you witness injustice and say nothing, you become part of the problem. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just did what anyone could and should do in that situation." Her humble response belied the significant impact of her actions. The videos she had captured had been viewed over 30 million times, sparking a national conversation about racial profiling in commercial settings that had extended far beyond the original incident. After the hearing concluded, Dominic met privately with Director Palmer in a small conference room adjacent to the main chamber. Palmer closed the door behind them, creating a momentary bubble of quiet amid the bustling Capitol. "Well done," Reynolds Palmer said, extending his hand. "Your testimony was exactly what was needed. Clear, factual, and impossible to dismiss." "Thank you, sir," Dominic replied as they shook hands. "Do you think it will lead to actual change?" "It already has," Palmer assured him, gesturing for Dominic to sit. The regulatory reforms this committee is considering have been on the FAA's wish list for years, but they lacked the political momentum to move forward. Your experience, and more importantly, the irrefutable documentation of it, created that momentum. Dominic nodded, recognizing the truth in Palmer's assessment. And the Operation Vanguard case. Any update closed successfully. Palmer reported with satisfaction. Your video deposition was compelling. The Johnston faction leadership received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. The organization is effectively dismantled. This was welcome news. Despite the exposure of Dominic's identity, the case that had occupied nearly 2 years of his career had reached a successful conclusion. And the individuals from Flight 837, Dominic asked, "What's the status of their cases?" Palmer opened a folder on the table between them. Heather Wilson pled guilty to federal charges of making false statements and interfering with a federal officer. 18 months, probation, 200 hours of community service, and permanent disqualification from working in commercial aviation. Seems appropriate, Dominic commented. William Preston faces more serious charges. Palmer continued. The U.S. Attorney's Office has charged him with making false statements, interference with a flight crew, and civil rights violations. His trial is scheduled for March. He's also facing multiple civil lawsuits, from United Airways for costs related to the diversion, and a class action from passengers whose travel was disrupted, and Officers Riggs and Anderson, both terminated from the Charlotte Airport Authority. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division's investigation expanded to include all security removal incidents at the airport over the past 5 years. They've already identified a pattern of discriminatory enforcement that will likely result in additional actions and mandated reforms. Dominic absorbed this information with a measured nod. The consequences had been swift and substantial, not just for the individuals directly involved, but for the systems that had enabled their actions. There's more, Palmer added, turning a page in his folder. Captain Richard Thompson has become an unlikely ally. After his termination from United Airways, he began speaking out about the pressures on flight crews to accommodate prejudiced passengers and the lack of clear protocols for evaluating security concerns. He's now consulting with several airlines on their training programs. "That's unexpected," Dominic admitted. "People can surprise you," Palmer observed. "Sometimes facing consequences forces genuine reflection." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. An aide entered to inform them that their car was waiting to take them back to FBI headquarters. As they gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Palmer placed a hand on Dominic's shoulder. "One more thing, Reynolds. The Bureau's Transportation Security Reform Initiative has been officially approved. We'd like you to head it up, if you're interested." Dominic paused, considering the offer. It represented a significant shift from his previous counterterrorism focus, but also an opportunity to create lasting change in a system that affected countless travelers daily. "I'll need to discuss it with my family," he said finally. "My father's health is still a consideration." Of course, Palmer agreed. "Take the time you need. The position will be there when you're ready." As they walked through the Capitol corridors past staffers and security personnel who recognized Dominic from news coverage, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. What had begun as a humiliating removal from an aircraft had evolved into something far more significant, a catalyst for reforms that might prevent others from experiencing similar treatment. Justice in this case had not been solely about punishment for wrongdoing, though that had certainly occurred. It had been about creating accountability, exposing hidden patterns, and using that exposure to drive meaningful change. It had been about transforming individual suffering into collective progress, a process his father had engaged in throughout his career in education. The autumn sun was bright as they emerged from the Capitol building, casting long shadows across the historic grounds. Justice had been served not just for Dominic Reynolds personally, but for the principle that dignity and equal treatment should not depend on the color of one's skin or the authority of one's badge. The journey was far from complete, but an important milestone had been reached, one that would ripple through policies, practices, and public consciousness long after the cameras stopped rolling and the headlines moved on to other stories. 6 months after the United Airways Flight 837 incident, Dominic Reynolds stood before a diverse group of airline executives, security personnel, and transportation regulators in the main conference room at FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Behind him, a large screen displayed the title of the presentation, "Beyond Bias: Reimagining Security and Service in Commercial Aviation." The changes we're discussing today aren't about political correctness or public relations. Dominic stated, his voice carrying authority born of experience. They're about effectiveness, accuracy, and true security. Bias doesn't just harm individuals. It undermines the very systems we've built to keep air travel safe. As the newly appointed special advisor to the FBI's Transportation Security Reform Initiative, Dominic had spent the past 4 months developing comprehensive recommendations for industry-wide changes. Today marked the official unveiling of those recommendations to key stakeholders who had the power to implement them. Our extensive review of passenger removal incidents over the past decade revealed disturbing patterns. He continued advancing to a slide showing statistical analysis. Black passengers were 6.4 times more likely to be removed from flights than white passengers for comparable behaviors. Middle Eastern and South Asian passengers faced similar disparities, particularly after being flagged for suspicious behavior that upon review consisted of nothing more than speaking their native language or wearing traditional religious attire. The data was compelling and irrefutable. Many in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, confronted with evidence that could not be dismissed as anecdotal or isolated. These patterns don't just harm innocent travelers, Dominic emphasized. They actively undermine security by focusing resources on false positives while potentially missing genuine threats. Bias isn't just unfair. It's inefficient and dangerous. He advanced to the next slide, which outlined the key recommendations, standardized evidence-based criteria for security interventions, multi-level verification protocols before passenger removal, mandatory documentation of all security-related incidents, independent review of removal patterns with quarterly public reporting, comprehensive training on objective threat assessment, clear accountability mechanisms for unjustified removals. These recommendations have been developed in consultation with security experts, civil rights attorneys, behavioral scientists, and, most importantly, the passengers who have been directly affected by discriminatory practices, Dominic explained. They represent not just best practices, but necessary steps to ensure our aviation system truly serves and protects all travelers equally. As the formal presentation concluded and the room broke into discussion groups, Dominic stepped aside, observing the industry leaders as they engaged with the material. Thomas Miller, the United Airways CEO who had overseen the company's response to the Flight 837 incident, approached him. Agent Reynolds Miller greeted him, extending his hand. United has already implemented several of these recommendations, but I see we have more work to do. It's an ongoing process, Dominic acknowledged as they shook hands. The important thing is measurable progress and genuine commitment. The quarterly public reporting requirement will be controversial, Miller noted. Many airlines won't want their removal statistics published for competitors and customers to see. Transparency drives accountability. Dominic replied simply. Without it, promises of change remain just promises. Miller nodded, conceding the point. Your experience on our flight has changed this industry more in 6 months than years of internal discussions and gradual reforms. Sometimes it takes a spotlight on our failures to motivate real progress. As Miller moved on to join one of the discussion groups, Dominic noticed a familiar face entering the conference room. Jessica Martinez, now the executive director of Speak Up in Transit, her organization having grown exponentially since its founding. Agent Reynolds, she greeted him warmly. Or should I say Special Advisor Reynolds? Now Dominic is fine, he replied with a smile. How are you, Jessica? The organization seems to be thriving. Beyond our expectations, she confirmed. We've trained over 12,000 people now, and we're partnering with transportation companies to incorporate bystander intervention techniques into their customer service training. I saw the app you developed, Dominic noted. Very impressive. Jessica nodded, her expression brightening with enthusiasm. The Suit Up app lets witnesses document incidents in real time, connects them with appropriate reporting channels, and provides guidance on safe intervention techniques. It's been downloaded over 200,000 times. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of FAA Administrator Caroline Foster, who requested Dominic's input on a point of discussion that had emerged in one of the breakout groups. As he excused himself to address the question, Dominic reflected on how far the ripple effects of Flight 837 had spread. The incident had catalyzed changes not just at United Airways, but across the commercial aviation industry. The FAA had revised its guidance on passenger removals, implementing many of the recommendations Dominic had just presented. The Transportation Security Administration had overhauled its behavioral detection protocols, replacing subjective assessments with evidence-based criteria. Airlines had invested millions in new training programs focused on objective threat evaluation and bias mitigation. More significantly, the public conversation about profiling in transportation settings had expanded and deepened. What had once been dismissed as individual complaints or isolated incidents was now recognized as a pattern requiring structural solutions. Later that evening, as Dominic packed up his materials following the successful presentation, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Dad. "How did it go?" Robert Reynolds asked without preamble when Dominic answered. "Better than expected," Dominic reported. "Most of the major airlines have committed to implementing the recommendations, and the FAA is incorporating them into their regulatory framework." "Good," Robert said with satisfaction. "And how are you feeling about all this? This wasn't the career path you planned." Dominic considered the question as he gazed out the window at the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky. It wasn't, he agreed, but it feels right. Using what happened to create meaningful change. That's more satisfying than I expected. "That's how progress works," Robert observed. "Rarely planned, often painful, but ultimately necessary. You've taken something that was meant to diminish you and transformed it into a catalyst for change that will benefit countless others. I had a good example to follow," Dominic replied, thinking of his father's decades of work transforming educational systems from within. Speaking of examples, Robert continued, "I've been invited to speak to the Atlanta School Board about incorporating the suit training into their student leadership program. Apparently being the father of the FBI agent from the plane gives me extra credibility these days." Dominic laughed. The Reynolds men changing the world one system at a time. "That's right," Robert agreed, his voice warm with pride. "Though I still maintain your mother deserves most of the credit for your level head in crisis. Lord knows you didn't get that from me." After ending the call, Dominic made his way through the now empty FAA building toward the exit. 6 months ago, he had been forcibly removed from an aircraft his dignity challenged, his identity questioned. Today, he had stood before leaders of the very industry that had failed him, guiding them toward substantive reforms that would reshape policies and practices nationwide. The change wasn't perfect or complete. No single initiative could eliminate biases deeply embedded in individuals and institutions. But it was real, measurable, and continuing to expand. Reports of discriminatory removals had declined by 47% across major airlines. Documentation protocols had improved transparency and accountability. Training programs were being revised based on evidence rather than assumptions. Most importantly, passengers who might have suffered in silence now had pathways to report incidents, resources to support their claims, and growing confidence that their experiences would be taken seriously. As Dominic exited the building, a gentle spring rain was falling on the capital city. The journey that had begun in humiliation on United Airways Flight 837 had transformed into something profound and far-reaching, not just a personal vindication, but a structural realignment that would protect the dignity and rights of countless travelers long after the details of his individual experience had faded from public memory. That he reflected as he walked toward his car was the most meaningful form of justice. Not just punishment for past wrongs, but transformation that prevented future ones. It was the legacy his father had built in education, and now it was the legacy Dominic was building in his own field. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, just as truth and accountability had begun to cleanse systems long stained by bias and assumption. 1 year to the day after the United Airways Flight 837 incident, Dominic Reynolds found himself once again in an airport preparing to board a flight from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta. The past 12 months had transformed both his career and the landscape of commercial aviation in ways he could never have anticipated when he first set out on that fateful journey to his father's bedside. As special advisor to the FBI's Transportation Security Reform Initiative, he had divided his time between Washington and Atlanta, balancing his new responsibilities with regular visits to his father, whose health had stabilized but still required careful monitoring. Today's trip was special. Not just a routine visit home, but a celebration of Robert Reynolds' 71st birthday, a milestone that had seemed uncertain in the dark days following his hospitalization. Dominic approached the gate for his flight, aware of the subtle glances of recognition from fellow travelers and airline staff. Though the media frenzy had eventually subsided, his face remained familiar to many, particularly within airports and among those who had followed the reforms his experience had sparked. "Good afternoon, Mr. Reynolds." The gate agent greeted him with professional courtesy. "We're beginning boarding shortly. You've been upgraded to first-class seat 2A. "Thank you," Dominic replied, accepting the new boarding pass. The upgrade wasn't surprising. Airlines had become notably attentive to his travel experiences over the past year, though he had never requested or expected special treatment. He viewed it not as a personal perk, but as a visible symbol of the industry's commitment to change, however motivated that commitment might be. As he waited for boarding to begin, Dominic reflected on the remarkable journey of the past 12 months. The congressional hearings had led to formal regulatory changes, with the FAA implementing new protocols for passenger removals and security interventions. United Airways had undergone a comprehensive overhaul of its training and security procedures, becoming an unexpected leader in anti-bias initiatives across the industry. William Preston had ultimately pled guilty to federal charges, receiving 2 years probation, a substantial fine, and mandatory community service. More significantly, his experience had prompted him to reassess his own biases and assumptions, leading to a surprising second act as a speaker on corporate ethics and unconscious bias, a transformation that Dominic viewed with cautious optimism. Heather Wilson had reached out several months after the incident, requesting a meeting that Dominic had eventually agreed to. Their conversation had been difficult but necessary, with Wilson taking full responsibility for her actions without excuse or deflection. She had since become involved with Jessica Martinez's Speak Up in Transit organization, sharing her perspective as someone who had participated in discriminatory practices and now worked to prevent them. The boarding announcement interrupted Dominic's reflections. He gathered his carry-on bag and joined the line, moving efficiently through the process and settling into Seat 2A, the very seat designation that had been the site of so much contention on Flight 837. As other passengers boarded, Dominic noticed a flight attendant approaching, a young black woman with a professional demeanor and a name tag that read Alicia. Agent Reynolds, she greeted him quietly. "It's an honor to have you on our flight today. Your work has changed things for the better. Not just for passengers, but for crew members like me, too." The simple acknowledgement carried weight beyond its words. It was a reminder that the changes stemming from his experience affected not only travelers who might face discrimination, but also employees who wanted to serve with fairness and dignity, but had lacked the structural support to do so. "Thank you," Dominic replied. "That means a lot." As the aircraft prepared for departure, Dominic's phone buzzed with a text from his sister. "Cake is ready." Dad's pretending he doesn't want to fuss, but he's changed his shirt 3 times. "Safe flight." The message brought a smile to his face. Some things remained wonderfully constant amid all the changes of the past year. His father's mixture of humility and pride, Kiana's affectionate teasing, the warmth of family that had sustained him through the most challenging moments of his career. The flight took off smoothly, climbing through clouds into clear blue skies. Dominic opened his laptop to review some materials for an upcoming presentation to new FBI recruits about bias recognition and intervention, another outgrowth of his experience that was reshaping not just aviation security, but law enforcement training more broadly. Midway through the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Michael Rodriguez speaking. Some of you might recognize that name. I was the first officer who came to check on a situation in the cabin during the now famous Flight 837 incident last year." Dominic looked up, surprised by the unexpected connection. "I just wanted to say that it's an honor to have Special Advisor Reynolds on board with us today." Rodriguez continued. "The changes that have come about because of that incident have made us better, as an airline, as a security system, and as individuals. It's a reminder that sometimes the path to improvement requires confronting uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our practices." A murmur of recognition rippled through the cabin, and several passengers turned to look at Dominic, who acknowledged them with a modest nod. As the flight continued toward Atlanta, Dominic's thoughts turned to a conversation he'd had with his father just after Robert's release from the hospital a year ago. They had been sitting on the porch of the family home watching evening settle over the neighborhood, when Robert had shared a perspective that continued to guide Dominic's approach to his work. "You know," son Robert had said, "what happened on that plane wasn't just about you or about those particular people who treated you badly. It was about a system that allowed it to happen, that expected it to happen. Changing individuals is important, but changing systems is what creates lasting impact. That wisdom had informed every aspect of Dominic's work over the past year. Rather than focusing solely on punishing those directly involved, he had channeled his efforts toward structural reforms that would prevent similar incidents for countless travelers who didn't have the protection of a badge or the platform to seek accountability. The results were already measurable. A 62% reduction in disputed passenger removals across major airlines. Standardized documentation protocols that created transparency and accountability training programs that emphasized objective threat assessment rather than subjective perceptions. More significantly, the conversation about bias in transportation settings had expanded beyond aviation to include ride-sharing services, train systems, and cruise lines, all of which had begun implementing versions of the protocols developed through the Transportation Security Reform Initiative. The flight began its descent into Atlanta, the city sprawling below in the afternoon sun. As Dominic prepared for landing, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. Not just the physical journey from Washington to Atlanta, but the longer path from humiliation and injustice to meaningful change and personal growth. When the aircraft touched down and taxied to the gate, Dominic gathered his belongings, nodding his thanks to the flight crew as he disembarked. In the terminal, he spotted Kiana waiting for him, a handmade sign reading FBI's Finest, held jokingly above her head. "Really?" he asked as he approached, eyebrow raised. "Dad made it," she replied with a grin, hugging him warmly. "He's waiting in the car. Couldn't find parking, or so he claims. I think he's just nervous about the surprise party that he definitely doesn't know about." As they walked through the terminal toward the exit, Kiana updated him on family news and birthday preparations. The conversation was wonderfully ordinary, a refreshing contrast to the weightier discussions that had dominated so much of the past year. Outside, they found Robert waiting in the passenger seat of Kiana's car, his face lighting up as he spotted his son. Dominic placed his bag in the trunk and slid into the back seat. "Happy birthday, Dad," he said, reaching forward to clasp his father's shoulder. "Nothing happy about getting older," Robert grumbled, though his eyes betrayed his pleasure at seeing his son. "But having both my children here, that's worth celebrating." As they drove toward the family home where friends and relatives secretly awaited their arrival, Robert turned to look at Dominic. "I watched your testimony at the FAA hearing last week," he said. "You did good, son. Real good." "I had a good example to follow," Dominic replied simply. Robert nodded, understanding the reference to his own lifetime of work, challenging discriminatory systems in education. "You know what I'm proudest of," Robert continued. "Not just that you stood up for yourself when it mattered, but that you turned a moment of personal injustice into something bigger, something that benefits people you'll never even meet." As they arrived at the house where cars lined the street in testament to the gathering inside, Dominic thought about his father's words. The journey that had begun on United Airways Flight 837 had indeed become something bigger than one man's experience or vindication. It had become a catalyst for change, a moment of reckoning that had forced acknowledgement of truths long denied or minimized. It had created openings for reforms that might otherwise have remained impossible. It had transformed his own career path in ways he could never have anticipated. But most importantly, it had validated the principle his father had instilled in him from childhood, that dignity maintained in the face of injustice was not just a personal virtue, but a powerful force for change. Sometimes the most effective response to discrimination wasn't outrage or retaliation, but the steady, undeniable witness of one's own humanity, a truth that no badge, uniform, or authority could diminish. As he followed his father and sister into the house, greeted by the warm chorus of surprise from gathered loved ones, Dominic Reynolds felt the full circle of the journey complete. From humiliation to vindication, from individual injustice to structural reform, from personal crisis to professional purpose, the path had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led to a resolution more meaningful and far-reaching than he could have imagined when it began. In that moment of celebration, surrounded by those who had supported him through the darkest moments and shared in his subsequent triumphs, Dominic found the truest form of justice, not merely in consequences for those who had wronged him, but in the creation of a world where such wrongs would be less likely to occur for anyone regardless of who they were or what badge they carried. That was a legacy worth building, a resolution worth fighting for, a future worth believing in. The story of United Airways Flight 837 and Special Agent Dominic Reynolds continues to inspire travelers and transportation professionals alike. Their experience demonstrates how one person's dignity under fire can transform an industry and protect thousands of future passengers from discrimination. If you've witnessed or experienced profiling while traveling, remember, speaking up matters. Recording creates accountability, and your voice can drive meaningful change. Like, subscribe, and share this video to spread awareness about the ongoing work toward truly equal treatment in our transportation systems.